right. Good morning, commissioners. And with that, over to you, Chair Harrington.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Welcome, everyone, to the June 2nd, 2022 Washington County Board of Commissioners Roundtable. Wow, it's June already. It's pretty amazing. Time flies. So the first item on the agenda is the meeting kickoff, any informational updates, and rolling agenda review. I thought now would be a good time for us to just checkpoint the scheduling and the timing of our activities over the next few months so that summer doesn't just get away from us. I want to thank you, commissioners, for letting staff know what your travel and vacation plans are this summer. That's really helpful so that we can make sure that we have quorum and so forth. So if we could, I'd like to call your attention to the roundtable rollout plan. We're going to have a really in-depth conversation today with Ms. Angie and our interim CFO. And of course, we welcome our new CFO as well, Greg Munn. So that'll be great. And we have a few other really timely topics that we'll be covering after that as well. At this juncture, we do not have an August roundtable plan. But that remains a little bit in flux, but just stay tuned for that. The next roundtable that we know for sure we're going to have is September 8th. And this is where we're going to have a bit more of a deep dive, if I use that expression, with regard to our county council's office. So Mr. Carr is going to have all the members of his team join us. And then we're going to have a really good overview of the county council's office and what's on their plate. Then we do not yet, oops, I forgot to list the October meeting. We may or may not have an October roundtable, but we know for sure that we will have roundtables in November and December. That's our usual setting things up, taking stock through the remainder of the year and setting things up for next year. So we do have some items that we've carried over from our roundtable last October as well. So I don't think I've lost anything there, but sometimes Ms. Angie helps me realize what details I may have lost. So if I forgot anything, Ms. Angie, please feel free to kick them in. Nope.
No, you didn't, Chair Harrington. And I think I appreciate you raising up some of the October being in flux as we, as your board and as I and the team work on teeing up our strategic planning conversation. And what you'll hear a bit more today about financial sustainability planning, that is yet to kind of be determined how that fits into the roundtable as well as board work sessions. So more to come as we work through and define what that framing process is and key points of discussion and decision for your board.
And if I could also bring in, we thought for the Q3 town hall that we would look at, I think, positioning that in August, if I remember, Ms. Angie, as a follow-up to our budget work, June and July roundtables, to really come back to our community about how we utilized their input and our budget equity tool in the budget and start flowing into the next year as well. I'll do an update on that so we can see that play out versus just having to remember it in our heads. Any questions on that? No, okay. I don't want to.
Chair,
Yes, yes.
did you say that you thought that was going to be in August? I'm not sure that's a good month to have a town hall, but were you thinking it was going to be in August that we were going to do that?
I can't remember the specifics of the date that Ms. Angie and I had been exploring. So I will do a checkpoint with my notes and the calendar on that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. So, okay, thank you. I'll wait for the final on that.
Yep, yep.
And I do want to express, Chair, I know you had mentioned just vacations as we move forward. As I'm looking at the rest of 2022, it already feels packed. So it's really helpful to staff if we understand when the board is going to be taking vacations so that we can be planning accordingly.
Yep, yep. So towards that end, I paid particular attention to the roundtable agenda and caught up with various topics that I know I'm particularly interested in and items that bring to closure some of the major work tasks or initiatives that we had on our board initiatives. But towards that end, sorry to walk away from you, and let me turn my background off so you can see what I just referred to. Can you see that? You don't have to look at the details, but these colors, I'm pink because it's me. And the weeks that have yellow on them are the weeks where at least one commissioner is away on vacation. And there are a few weeks here where at least two people are out. Oh, and on this one, I didn't mark right here. There should be a number 3 where 3 of you are out. So I think, yeah, we will be careful to make sure that, Mr. Carr, am I right? Aren't there, for ordinances, we have to have at least 3, or is it 4? Or am I just
3.
remembering?
I think it's 3.
Yeah,
But I'll double check that, Chair.
which is what we need for quorum anyway, so I don't need to worry about it. At Metro, we had to have 5 of 7 in order to present in order to pass an ordinance. So, which is one more than quorum. So that's why I'm always testing that number. Thank you, Mr. Carr, for making sure I get it right. So, so I also just want to highlight for you, while the date is correct on the roundtable plan, when you look at the September rolling agenda, we are having the roundtable on September 8th, which is after Labor Day, not before Labor Day. The column on the rolling agenda for September has it before Labor Day, even though it does have the date right. So I just want to make sure you're not confused by that. We wanted to make sure that instead of having it on September 1st, which is before Labor Day, that we had it after Labor Day, because that's really the mental setup for, okay, we've now got 4 months left to the remainder of the year, and making sure we're all on board with that. It also happens to be the day after school starts as well. So, and I thank staff for those different cues on the rolling agenda as well. Because that's a big deal for all of our working families here at Washington County. So, are there any comments or questions on the roundtable? Okay, all right. I want to thank staff for organizing this for us and making sure we can see the workflow of different things. It is really a very helpful tool for us to make sure that we know what is coming and how to make sure we have time for our various reading our packets, doing some deep dives, asking for briefings, or setting up those briefing meetings before we get the packets and so forth. So thank you. All righty, well, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is never a bad thing, because I know that we've got a lot to talk about with regard to our finances. So Ms. Angie, I'm going to turn it over to you and your team members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I did want to add, I couldn't just get to my mute fast enough. The staff will be bringing forward to your board on the 14th during leadership updates, the plan to the board to come back to in-person meetings. As you recall, the board had discussed that this transition would occur at some point in the new fiscal year. So we are working through the logistics right now and more to come. And I plan to give that update on the 14th. So I just wanted to also touch base on that. And before we actually jump into the financial discussion, Clerk Moss, could you promote David Martinez, please? And I see he's joining now. So this is, and I'll wait until he fully comes over so he doesn't catch me mid-sentence. There's David. So this is David's official second day, similar to Greg. And he is also in the office and getting his technology set up, as we all have to have challenges through that. David is joining us most recently as Deputy Director from Latino Network. David has an extensive history in higher ed leadership, as well as has worked at Multnomah County. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to welcome David, and David, to see if you had any thoughts you wanted to share with the board.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and just so excited and so ready to be a resource and continue the amazing work that is happening in Washington County. It feels like coming home. I used to work out here, specifically in the school districts and with Portland Community College, the Rock Creek campus, and just the welcome and just the excitement that I feel, I just can't express enough. So again, thank you for the confidence and for this amazing opportunity.
Thanks for coming back for day 2.
Thank you. Yes, and I'll figure out the electronic IT earpiece stuff soon.
No worries. People have to remind me to unmute and undouble mute all the time. It just happened again last night. So there you have it. But even though Commissioner Willie, Commissioner Treese, and I have been on board for 3.5 years, we remember how much time it took to set up our technology and do all the system updates and getting everything anchored. Plus, onboarding here at Washington County has improved as well. So we do want to make sure that you and Greg Munn do have the time to understand and feel welcome for the full portfolio that is Washington County, in addition to having the time that you need to get familiar with your own portfolios and the opportunities, challenges, and needs there. So don't worry, we are thrilled to have you. You are the right people at the right time in the right place. And I'm really thrilled for Ms. Angie that she has her full team staffed now. We wanted to make sure that she had the time to have the right folks on her team to do this work and not just have the positions filled. So please know we have every confidence in you, and welcome aboard. Commissioners, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to contribute? And I neglected when we just started the meeting to note that we have all commissioners here. I'm Chair Catherine Harrington. We have Commissioners Nafisa Fai, Pam Treese, Roy Rogers, and Jerry Willie. So terrific. All right, back to you, Ms. Angie.
Thank you. And thanks for being here this morning, David, and popping on real quick. So I would like to, and I believe Rodney is available. Thank you, Clerk Moss. So as your board is aware, Rodney Rhodes has been serving as our interim Chief Financial Officer. Really want to extend, once again, congratulations to Jack Liang for his position at Clean Water Services. And that did leave a hole for Washington County. Quickly, I sprung to action and reached out to my network and was able to connect with Ron Hollyfield, who's the president and owner of Strategic Government Resources. And one of the arms of their business is actually interim placements. And so I had asked Ron, I need a CFO interim. Do you have any candidates? And Ron quickly said, we have someone who is recently retired, and it sounds like this would be a great fit. And very quickly was able to connect with Rodney. I'm just grateful for his leadership and guidance through this transition. I think we are in a great place to be welcoming Greg Munn, and we're setting in place what the strategy is as we look at financial sustainability and operations of the finance department. That is a benefit of an interim. The interim is not only helping to stabilize the team, the work, and the direction of any work group that an interim may be brought in for, but they also, the other benefit is because of their generally experience, because most often they are retired, they are also somewhat like a consultant as well. And so the purpose of today's discussion is just to have a discussion on what is our financial position and Rodney's organizational observations that he will be leaving us with as he transitions out of his interim. He will be with Washington County through the end of June. That will be helpful for Greg in his transition, and has offered to continue in service as Greg, I, and the team may need through this transitionary period. So Rodney, I personally just want to say thank you for your leadership during this time. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I greatly appreciate it. Before I get started, did I see that Greg was elevated to the?
Yes, he is. Yep.
Greg, if you're able to work through the technology issues, if you want to just take a moment and say hello to the board, I think that would be great.
Where is that unmute button and the video button? There he is. Oh, we can see you, but we can't hear you. Bummer. You're unmuted, but something isn't quite right. Do you have external speakers like I do? Nope. 1 minute. Okay.
While he's working on that, I'll just tell you, I had the good fortune of being involved in the CFO interview process when we went through the nationwide search, and we had a tremendous group of talented individuals, and Greg immediately made an impression on me as we were assessing the talent. his background, his experience. I think you'll find he brings a kind of a calming demeanor to the position, which is sometimes greatly needed. I know sometimes the staff in my short time here looked at me and said, "What the heck is this guy doing?" But anyway, Greg, I think, is going to be a tremendous asset to the organization. So don't laugh, Tanya. Greg, did you get it? Nah, not quite.
Well, Rodney, maybe let's move on, and Greg, you can troubleshoot and we'll come back for that introduction.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Clerk Moss. I appreciate it. Go ahead in advance. So, first of all, let me just say I am honored and privileged to have been able to spend the last 8 months. And when they say time flies when you're having fun, it truly does. It seems like just a few weeks ago that I did get started, and so it has been a wonderful experience here. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about the current state of Washington County from my observations, and then the future state of Washington County, and then just have a general roundtable discussion about any questions or thoughts that you might have as well. Next slide, please.
Test.
I hear him.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Go
Okay.
ahead, Greg.
Okay, sorry. Well, hi, everybody. I've met some of you before already, but my name is Greg Munn, as you obviously know. It's great to be here. I am returning back to the wet side of the mountains, so I'm hoping that the extra humidity does my complexion well. So I'm looking forward to maybe getting rid of some wrinkles along the way. I'm super excited to be here so far. I feel like I'm drinking from the fire hose a little bit. I'm super glad that Rodney's here. He and I have had lots of conversations, and I feel like there's going to be a good glide path to start making some differences. So I'm excited to make a difference here in the finance area, and also how that impacts the entire county and the services that we provide to the public, the taxpayer, who is our customer. I'm excited to get to know each one of you a little bit better, or at least get to know you at all. So I'll probably be sending an email out pretty soon and see if we can find a time to have a cup of coffee or go to lunch or do something like that. So anyway, great to be here. Nice to see all of you. Thank you.
Well, Greg, I hope that Rodney has let you know that you have 2 CPAs as county commissioners here. You a gauge for our interest in asking questions and learning and understanding, as well as a good gauge for what out of the 5 of us are levels of comfort with risk or not too. So
Yeah, exactly.
It's not, there you go, Rodney, there's your homework assignment from me, huh? Thank you.
Yeah, Greg and I have spent a little bit of time together over the last day and some time this morning. And prior to him joining us, we tried to have regularly scheduled just check-ins and discussions about some of the things that he would be walking into, and some of the things that he needed to be prepared for. So, and I didn't scare him off either. So he came back for day 2, which is a good thing. So, all right, let's get started. So I want to talk a little bit about the current state of Washington County from my observations. And just by the way of background, I don't know if I ever shared, I spent 35 years of work in municipal, county, and utility district areas. I retired in April of 21. It doesn't seem like it's been that long ago, but April of 21. 2021, I retired from the North Texas Municipal Water District as their executive director, and then worked in that organization as the deputy executive director over administrative services. So I had an opportunity to experience a lot of both the engineering side as well as the financial and internal services side. So Washington County's current state, I will tell you, I have been extremely impressed with the community engagement, just the community in general. You have got a wonderful county, and the staff here is amazing. They are dedicated, hardworking. They will put in whatever many hours are necessary, and I've had to actually have conversation with them about paring back a little bit and getting that work-life balance. And great staff, dedicated staff. You have an outstanding county administrator, and I'm not just saying that because she is here today, but you have an outstanding county administrator and talented leadership team to back her up. And so great choices on your ACA hires and wonderful leadership and vision. I mentioned the community and engaged community base, and that's a wonderful thing. Washington County is, as you know, going through some organizational changes, some change of direction. The strategic planning kind of sets the stage for that tomorrow vision, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Definitely changing course, and that's a good thing with where we are organizationally. And I think the leadership will help steer and guide that as well as the board. Next slide, please.
Whoops, hang on one second, Rodney.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you bring to life for me from your CFO level of experience, bring to life the changing direction to become an outcomes focused organization? I know what that's like for me, right, as a board member, but how about for you and that level into the organization that I don't live and breathe at all?
Well, I'm glad you bring it up, because that is one of the focal points of the future state for the organization that I will be talking about, and you'll hear me. I get a little bit passionate about it, as some would know, but I will talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about some of the linkage, as I call it, to the financial planning aspect of where we go and how it directly ties to the strategic plan. I do want to, before we get started any deeper, I want to apologize. My allergies are acting up this morning, and so if I sound a little raspy, that's why. So I do apologize for that. Next slide, please. So we're going to touch base on a number of different areas this morning regarding the future state for Washington County. It all starts with the strategic plan and dovetails into the long-term financial plan, budgeting process, staffing plans. I'm going to talk a little bit about a capital improvement plan, a CIP, as I call it, and a little bit deeper dive into some of my observations there. Organizational studies, obviously, we've talked some about that. I know Tanya has some plans for some organizational studies. I want to talk a little bit about I'm going to dip my toe in the HR water for just a minute as well, talking about some compensation philosophies, compensation studies, job classifications, and the like. And then wrap up with facilities and IT master planning efforts, which we have also had some discussions around. Next slide. Strategic planning. I will tell you, in any organization I've ever been in, strategic planning is something that I hold near and dear to my heart because I believe it is the foundation for any organization moving forward. The strategic plan helps to develop priorities and allows us to begin developing what I call performance matrix to gauge successes and then identify areas of opportunity. So it is, in my opinion, the strategic plan needs to be an actionable plan, routinely reviewed and updated. It needs to be an outcome-based plan. And by that, what I mean is that it needs to be reportable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. I recommend that the board spend a fair amount of time reviewing your priorities, but more importantly, actively engage the community to hear their thoughts and ideas around where the priorities should be. What that will do for you is that will enable you to develop a strategic plan that really is focused on the outcomes based on that community involvement and those priorities. Next slide. As I mentioned, it allows the organization to develop some alignment with where those priorities are. One of the things that I have noticed throughout my career is organizations tend to be siloed, and that's not a bad thing because we all have our jobs to do, whether it's LUT, whether it's HHS, you name it. They focus on their particular areas because they have a job to do. A strategic plan will allow you to kind of take those blinders off and begin to look at the big picture and allow the organizations internally to begin to start focusing on what do I need to do in my part of the world, so to speak, to align our outcomes with the organizational goals and objectives. So that's extremely important. It also allows us to identify some risks, and we'll talk some about risks as it relates to long-term financial planning and things of that nature. I mentioned the long-range CIP. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that directly ties into the strategic plan because it allows us to begin planning for those what I call big ticket items that require some financial discussions around financing those particular projects. One of the things that I have always suggested as you're developing a strategic plan is it needs to be reportable. It needs to be something that you can communicate out both to the public, but also maintain on your website to identify where your successes are, where your opportunities for improvements are, and address those. Don't look at them as negatives. Look at them as positives. Look at them as something that you can take away from and work toward making successes. So using dashboards are really important in my opinion. And then reporting on successes or opportunities via annual reports. I know that you mentioned the community, the name escapes me, but the opportunity for citizen input and the times of year that you do that. I would also recommend that the county consider doing what I call a state of the county address. And that can be done on an annual basis. And generally speaking, speaking from from my experience, it's been done kind of toward the end or after the budget year. But State of the County addresses can be done in conjunction with your CAO, the board participation, and really it's an opportunity for you to have the public either come in or attend virtually and talk about where we're going as an organization, where we're going, what the go forward plans are, and communicate the year-end successes and opportunities that we look forward to in the following year. Next slide. Long-range financial planning. You'll notice that these, I'm not going to go through all of these, but long-range financial planning, there's a lot of check boxes here. They are directly linked to the strategic plan, but it also allows for some of the opportunities to begin to really begin focusing on opportunities to address threats from a long-term perspective. And it allows you to link that plan to your strategic plan and develop good, sound financial policies. One of the things that I would highly recommend for the organization, and this is more internally focused, but the board would take action, obviously, would be to go back through and revisit all of your financial and administrative policies, and look at areas of opportunity to help streamline and simplify some of those policies and take action. That's something that I recommend that you do probably once every 5 years or so. Review those policies because times change, things change, and so it's just important to stay up and make sure your policies are up to date. I mentioned capital improvement planning. Again, I'll talk a little bit about that, but you'll notice there's a lot of check boxes here. Capital improvement planning is critical from a long-range financial planning perspective because they, generally speaking, will involve big dollars. And so that's something that is, I think, very, very important. And when I talk about capital improvement planning, I'm not just talking about roads. I'm talking about IT. I'm talking about facilities. I'm talking about even looking at things like your fleet maintenance planning. All of those things directly tie into the capital improvement planning process. And one of the things that I have historically tried to do as it relates to a capital improvement plan is to really take a project and dissect it. And when I say that, it's the project description. What are we doing and why? All of the various components that go into the project. How that project is going to be funded. Is it going to be cash funded? Is it going to be debt funded? We'll talk more about that in future slides. So that to me is a critically important piece. And it almost becomes a separate budget approval process when you're talking about capital improvement planning. And then finally, budgeting. We'll talk a little bit about budgeting as we go forward as well. Next slide. So GFOA has made some recommended best practices that I think are really key to long-range financial planning. It allows for an annual projection of revenue and expenditures, obviously, but it's a more forward-looking, more in-depth process. It allows us to look at where our financial position is, both in the current state and the future state. And it looks at external factors because, as I mentioned earlier, things change priorities change. And so, those are things that have to be taken into consideration. And then looking at the government operations, I put here over at least 5 years. I've always said that, when you go out beyond 5 years, it's really a crystal ball at that point. You can pretty much look at a 5-year window for financial planning, especially as it relates to budgeting practices, and be pretty close. But sometimes from a long range perspective, you have to look beyond that 5-year window. It's a good starting point, as I've mentioned, to develop capital plannings, operational budgets, estimating revenues, and then the overall planning process and how that ties back to, again, that strategic plan, and supports the efforts and the priorities, both of the board and the community. Next slide. Benefits. Again, creating a long-term outlook, forecasting, budgeting, capital planning, allows you to identify those risks, as I mentioned earlier. It stimulates what I call big picture thinking. And by that, what I mean is it helps the organization come together and begin to look at some of the factors that might be affecting their particular areas, and have a better understanding of how everything ties and flows together. It provides a tool for long-term compliance with financial policies. Again, I think it's important to review those policies and make adjustments as needed. It allows you to mitigate risks. It allows you to identify those risks and take action to mitigate those risks and bring those to the board, and really have a good solid discussion around what those risks are and why. Really defines decision-making priorities, and really, again, creates that level of transparency for stakeholders, community members, bond rating agencies, and investors. Next slide. I'm going to shift gears to the budget process. This is a little bit of a sensitive subject, I know, right now, because we've had quite the challenge this year with the budget process. I believe that this is an opportunity to revamp the budget process, to really take a good hard look at how we go about forecasting revenues, how we go about talking about budget expenditures, and really shift our focus to an outcomes-based organization. I believe we need to start the process earlier. And again, this is more of an internal kind of focused area, but I believe we need to start the process earlier, and start looking first and foremost at position vacancies, where we can redirect position vacancies to save from FTE additions, if possible. Look at new positions requests, get it done early so that you can then shift focus and start looking at the other aspects of the budget process. There are a lot of things that go into the budget process that folks sometimes just don't realize. And this is an opportunity to begin that process earlier, have a more transparent process as you go through, and really start to take a deeper dive into some of the areas where we have opportunities. It'll, as I mentioned earlier, it'll allow you to move or reallocate positions to minimize FTE growth. And the last bullet I know is kind of taboo when you talk about FTE, but it gives you an opportunity to look at the elimination of positions through attrition. That doesn't mean laying people off. It doesn't mean people people losing their jobs. The reality of Washington County right now is that our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. We've got to find a way to control that. That starts with prioritizing where the organization wants to be, identifying what the core functions of the organization is. What is the county's core functions? And beyond that, what do we want to do organizationally that impacts our community? And so those are things that really, again, tie back to both the long-term financial plan as well as the strategic plan. Next slide. Incremental traditional budgeting, as I call it. Incremental budgeting is something that over time can catch up with an organization. I'm not going to touch on all of these bullets, but I will hit on the second bullet, and that is, it's not strategic. It just is not strategic. It's operationally focused, and that incremental approach tends to grow, again, expenditures over time with diminishing resource availability. It's just, in my opinion, this is not a sustainable approach to the budget process each year. It can create political conflict and public trust because of the transparency factor. It can present some challenges. And as I mentioned earlier, along with the strategic planning process, there's some volatility, especially as the environment changes and priorities change. Next slide. This is kind of the 5 pillars that GFOA has recommended for opportunities to change your budget process. Establishes that long-term vision, again, long-term financial planning, long-term strategic planning. It begins to develop trust and open communication. Allows us to make more informed decisions as we go through not only the current year budget process, but we look beyond the current year to future years. It establishes clear rules. That is, it allows us to focus our attention on policies, procedures, so that everyone has a clear understanding of how we're going about the budget process, what that looks like, and things of that nature. And lastly, it treats everyone fairly. It gives us an opportunity to direct the resources where they need to be in order to address the goals, the priorities of the organization. And everyone has a clear one Washington County approach to how we go about allocating those resources. Next slide. Capital improvement plan. Again, something near and dear to my heart. It's one of those things that, as I said earlier, it's a process where I almost see it as a second budget process, unless you have the ability to do it in conjunction with the budget process. It allows you to prioritize projects, and I'm talking roads, facilities, IT, and as I mentioned earlier, even fleet, and it could be expanded beyond that. It provides an opportunity to develop dollar thresholds for things like debt financing. It allows you to use both long-term and short-term debt opportunities to fund various projects. And I'll give you a great example. My prior life, I was able to look at the implementation of a new ERP system, which, by the way, we desperately need to look at. And it is a all-encompassing, when you're talking about an ERP system, It is an all-encompassing system that spills over not only in the finance area, but also into the HR area, into the fleet area, into the facilities area, you name it. It's going to be a big task, but in my opinion, this organization desperately needs to take a look at its current state of our IT solutions and begin the process of implementing a new ERP solution, however that may look. And I'm happy to talk more about that. It allows the ability, the use of debt financing, and I know Washington County historically has been a pay-as-you-go organization, but it allows you to start thinking about the utilization of a balanced debt issuance approach that will spread the costs of projects over time to a growing population. And we know Washington County is growing. That keeps your per capita costs down as the population grows. And again, it links back, if you recall that chart that we looked at earlier, it links back to the GFOA best practices, especially as it relates to the strategic planning portion of that chart. Next slide, please. Staffing plan. And I believe that a long-range staffing plan will help the organization as you become larger and as you become more focused on the priorities that come from the strategic planning effort. It will allow the organization an opportunity to develop a staffing plan that addresses those priorities and those needs for the organization. It paints a picture, if you will, for how the staffing will either increase or be redirected to address those priorities. I want to stress, and I have stressed this since I've gotten here, in a lot of instances, when you look at staffing plans, it's more focused on what I call those boots on the ground individuals, those people that are out there day in, day out in the field or public facing. And there's a tendency to forget those internal staff members. We all are in this together as an organization. When we look at staffing plans, it has to address the internal needs to support all of the operational things that the county does. And that means things like, and I'm going to pick on finance for a minute because we, I believe, are woefully understaffed. It includes HR, IT, all of those internal support functions that go in, day out to help and support the efforts of the public-facing operations group. Next slide. Organizational studies. I know we've had a few conversations about this, but Rodney's observation of Washington County is we desperately need to do some organizational studies. My recommendation is that those studies be conducted by an outside independent consulting firm to avoid any biased outcomes. I have seen in so many instances where organizational studies are driven by the organization that's being studied. That has a tendency to create biased outcomes. And so I would highly recommend that the CAO take the lead, someone from the CAO take the lead on the internal project management piece of an organizational study, and that the study be focused in that particular area with the direction of the CAO. I think you could probably look at organizational studies throughout the entire organization. As the county begins to evolve, and the county's priorities begin to change, that could create opportunity for organizational change. What does that look like? How do we implement that? All of those questions can be answered by that outside consulting firm. Next slide. Compensation philosophy. Compensation philosophy is an interesting animal, I'll call it. And it really varies. It really depends on what the organization wants from a compensation standpoint. But I believe that we need to review our current compensation philosophy, develop a new compensation system, and to be more competitive in the market, and then make some really tough decisions on where do we want to be in the market in terms of compensation. I've worked in organizations that want to be at the 50 percentile, for example, of the market. I've seen organizations that have wanted to be in the 60, 70% of the market. It really depends on the philosophy of the organization. What does that look like? Do we want to attract the best and brightest? Do we want to pay a more competitive salary than just an average salary? And so those are all decisions that, from a philosophical perspective, that organizations have to decide on. But I do believe that the time is right to begin looking at compensation philosophy. I will warn you, however, that in doing so, whatever decisions are made from a philosophical perspective, there could be a cost to that. But that cost will far outweigh losing very valuable employees going forward, and sometimes will mitigate higher turnover areas and things of that nature. So I think compensation is something that the organization really needs to take a hard look at. Financial impact, as I mentioned, you can take a comp or ratio approach to your philosophy. It's a little more expensive, but it eliminates salary compression along your ranges and along your philosophy on how you set up your pay ranges. I mentioned in here the step and grade plan. Step and grade plans are good for paramilitary organizations, such as your SO and other paramilitary type organizations. They work well. I personally believe that open ranges are a more effective tool from a compensation perspective for your rank and file employees. Again, as I mentioned, there are pros and cons to whatever decision you make. I just wanted to raise this because this is one of the observations that I think will greatly improve recruitment and retention of the best and brightest employees as you go forward. Next slide. Job classifications. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. We have a ton of job classifications. They're specific to departments. And for the most part, there's a lot of job classifications that are performing very similar duties. I'm kind of a simple kind of guy. So I say, keep them simple, keep generic titles, let the functional areas dictate how those positions would be utilized within each department. But I think you can greatly reduce the number of job classifications that you have within your current system by keeping it simple, keeping it generic, and then let your functional areas drive the actual job duties. That does, I will tell you, is going to require a lot of work, but it's not something that is insurmountable and can't be overcome. As I mentioned here, it greatly simplifies the recruiting process. and eliminates a lot of job classifications and keeps everything very generic. Next slide. Facilities and IT master planning. I know that we've had a number of conversations that this process is underway, and I know that you've got some very strong leadership that's driving this. You've got your new facilities director that I think will do a wonderful job at steering and guiding the facilities master planning process. I put this in here because I think this is a very important aspect of not only the strategic plan, because it ties directly into, but also the long-range financial plan. Because if you have facilities, for example, that you have identified, and I'll use the new courthouse as an example there, it allows you to begin looking at the bigger picture of what are our total needs and how are we going to go about the process of managing those needs, funding those needs, implementing those needs, because you can't do it all in 1 year. So it allows you to begin to forecast those needs out into the future and plan for not only how you're going to prioritize those, but also fund them and what that funding plan looks like. I mentioned earlier things like the issuance of long-term and short-term debt. I utilized short-term debt issuance for an IT ERP implementation, and it worked out very, very well. In a lot of instances, the IT world is changing so very quickly that short-term debt issuance for IT master plan projects, for the larger scale projects, may be an opportunity for the county to take a look at in order to fund some of those projects and get moving on a lot of the things that may currently be a pay-as-you-go type philosophy. Again, directly tied to the financial plan, the comprehensive CIP, the overall strategic plan, but most definitely would allow you to develop a funding strategy. Next slide. So in conclusion, wanted to just touch again, strategic planning, critically important for the organization, critically important to communicate out to the community, allows you to align goals and objectives, provide for measurable outcomes. Long-range financial planning, again, tying back into the strategic plan, all of these are linked together. All of these are integral parts of being able to provide the community and the board with where we're going organizationally and how we're going to get there. It paints that picture, if you will. The CIP, I can't stress enough the need for a comprehensive CIP, not only from a transparency perspective, but I also think it will allow you to see how we're going to fund projects, what the status of those projects are, and what the overall costs are compared to the original estimates, for example. And then the annual reporting through either online annual reports, printed annual reports, state of the county reports, to give a report card, if you will, of where we are from a initiatives perspective, how we're doing, how we're executing. If we are a little bit behind on some because our focus shifts to others, it allows for that transparent communication of how the organization is doing and how we have moved forward. Next slide. And with that, I'll shut up and be open to any comments or discussions.
So, Ms. Angie, this is, I really do hope that we have discussion here because these are tremendous observations. And I know I have questions on some specific areas, but I'm hoping that through the course of this discussion, Ms. Angie, Mr. Rhodes, you can help us have an idea or leave this discussion today with, rather than a list of, oh my goodness, here are things that we need to do, right? A laundry list, that we can have an idea that where there are things that need to be done, how they stitch together, that essentially there's the beginning stages for planning to accomplish those things. For me, that would be a better outcome of the discussion. But I'd also, I will try to do my usual and foster the discussion for all, well, 4 of us. Commissioner Willie is out at another meeting for this current hour. Darn, I lost my train of thought. So, sorry, I thought I had it there for a second. But Mr. Rhodes, feedback really is a gift. And I want to start by saying thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your expertise and your observations over these last 8 months, as you mentioned. I want to be sure that folks who either are listening to this meeting now or maybe viewing it later, that the county is not broken, but what we are trying to build to is a more resilient county, because from new eyes that have joined our organization with different experience and best practices experience, we now understand, or at least I understand, and we want to make sure that everyone on the board here understands that there are additional capability systems, processes that we need to get in place so that we are a more sustainable, resilient Washington County, providing the wide range of services that define the Washington County service portfolio. So with that, let me see what questions and comments Commissioner Rogers, Treese, and Vi may have. Go ahead, Commissioner Treese. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Rodney, thank you. This is really extremely comprehensive. I really appreciate the way that you've tied the financial piece with the strategic plan, and basically you haven't tied them. You've said they're inseparable. they are one and the same, actually, as we move forward. And it's a lot for me to absorb. And I'm not, it's interesting for me to think about what's the degree of change? What are we going, how are we going to move this? If we took all of these recommendations and moved them forward, how long would it take for us to get to that concept where we're with your individual pillars and moving forward over 5 years? I mean, we've got a new CFO, and I assume that Greg has been working closely with you on this presentation and is in line as well. But I think we're talking about a sea change here, and I'd like to know your thoughts about the magnitude of that change.
Well, first of all, let me say, I do not believe that this is a change that you can, I've always used the analogy, you can't flip a switch and change the organization. You can't flip a switch and change the way you do business. You have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And that requires priorities. It requires being able to look at, and again, board priorities, community priorities, putting those two together and coming into an agreement on where does Washington County want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now, because you are evolving as a county. We all know that. And so that is number one, in my opinion, getting those priorities set, because that allows for your county administrator to then begin formulating a plan of action. How are we going to take action to address those priorities? How are we going to direct the resources to address those priorities? In conjunction with that, I'm going to toss the ball, so to speak, over in Greg's court, because he's going to be tasked with beginning to develop that long-range financial plan. But that plan comes as a result of where those priorities are and how you execute those priorities. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I want to say it first. It starts first and foremost with board priorities, strategic planning, long-range financial planning, and establishing those necessary policies and procedures that need to be reviewed and updated to get you where you need to be. That is going to be, I would say at the very least, a 2-3 year project.
Thank you. And I'm interested in hearing what Greg has to say as well, but I just want to say thank you, because I needed the construct of what are we looking at in terms of future planning. We know this is going to take some time, but I do appreciate the one bite at a time. I always called it the whale, but the elephant worked too. So
Well,
Greg?
and Ms. Angie has some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I want to be fair to Greg, because this is day 2 for Greg. The purpose of today's conversation is really, think of it as a consultant assessment. We're hearing the opportunities today. The team will then take this and already is in process of some of that, taking this and putting it into a plan, an implementation plan moving forward. So what we're balancing is Rodney's time as interim and Greg being on day 2 and learning all of this in the current state, even though there has been a lot of preparatory conversation. So there will be next steps clearly in this conversation. This is meant for a discussion, not getting a thumbs up on implementation on any piece. So we really just wanted to hear the board's thoughts, and that's how I have viewed the benefit of that roundtable discussion, is really just an open platform and discussion. I do also want to underscore that we are building from a strong foundation at Washington County. And so this is part of evolution. This is part of being a learning organization, leaning on best practices, and needing to adjust to current state and future state. So I want to underscore the board's leadership, past board's leadership, all of the staff that came before myself, Rodney and Greg. We are evolving, and that's where Rodney was touching on. This is a great foundation, and so we're building forward, and I just want to assure the board of that. And I do want to reference, there are sources on many of Rodney's slides to GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, which is the public sector finance association. And there's, if the board or members of the viewing public want to dig deeper, there's great resources on GFOA's website as well. Greg, did you have any initial thoughts?
Well, actually, I had a lot of them, but both you and Rodney covered them already. I would just say, some of my comments were, first off, Rodney, I've never heard somebody else other than a commissioner a long time ago use the term "eat an elephant one bite at a time." So that was pretty interesting. That was 25 years ago. And also, as as Tanya mentioned, and this is my perception, being second day on the job. I've spent some time reading and talking to folks over the last couple of months, so I'm not entirely just up to 2 days. But my thought is there is a very good foundation here. The basis, if you look at a triangle, is very strong, is very stable. But I don't think that means this is the time to sit on that foundation. The time is to really think about, what kind of rooms are we going to have to add to the house as we move forward? How are we going to pay for that? What's the fiscal impacts in the long term? And ultimately, what has been said a couple of times here are what are the outcomes we're looking for? What do we want to say we did or accomplished, or the difference we made in people's lives in 5 years? That's really what it's all about to me. And so we've got a great foundation here. I look at the things that Rodney's mentioned. He and I've talked about this already, and I look at them as opportunities. And it's going to be exciting to be able to work on each one of those at a time. And eventually, at some point, because of that effort, we'll be in a place that we wouldn't have been had we not started maybe with this conversation today. So I'm excited about it. And I think I really appreciate what Rodney put together. That's pretty impressive. So, and I think it's a super great groundwork for us to move forward with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Fye, any questions, comments, things you'd like us to discuss?
I'll defer to Nafisa. Always will do that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I don't really have a question. I just want to extend my appreciation to Rodney. I feel like as a new commissioner, I have a better grasp of our budget situation in Washington County and some of the challenges and like you said, the opportunities that lie ahead. So I want to extend my deepest gratitude to your work and to the service that you provided to Washington County and the level of understanding that you gave to the community of what our budget situation is here and really highlighting the $30 million hole that we have. The presentation you gave this morning, Rodney, was really great. And I wonder if we can make that available to the public because I saw that it wasn't attached to our, the budget that was, no, not the budget, the agenda that was advertised in our website. So that's it. Just really just gratitude and best of luck to you in your next endeavor and keep in touch with Greg and Tanya and look forward to hearing your updates in what you end up doing, Rodney. So good luck to you and thanks for your service.
Thank you so much. And I do want to apologize for the tardiness in getting the presentation to you. It was, I was still working on it last night, so I do apologize for that.
Clerk, for the board and members of the public, Clerk Moss has updated the packet with the presentation, so that is available to the public. And as Rodney said, during the intermission of the budget committees, yes, we were working on this last night.
Yeah, I'll chime in as well, Rodney. It's hard to believe it's been 8 months. I guess as life slogs on, we all find that time goes pretty fast, and so nice to have you. And I think you were a nice addition and interim, and certainly brought value to the organization. So all of that said, that's important. I won't say hello to Greg. I'll just say good to see you again. He and I have, for full disclosure, worked together as in a different relationship a few years back, and it's good to see you. And he knows my expertise in an area that he works in, so we will renew that. My comments are along these lines. One, Rodney, thank you for robustly extracting information from GFA presentations. I think that you weave those into a very comprehensive and compelling piece of work. I've seen those in different venues before, but I think you did a nice job of taking and aggregating some different things and to tell a story. My comment to you is a couple of things. One, your presentation starts at a point where we need to be after we need to do some additional pre-work. So you start on saying this is what we need to do after we have come to some understanding of where we're going. And my observation after being on this board for a long, long time is that, and it's no secret, I've said it before, is that we're evolving very quickly into a different set of services, and we're very much different than we were a few years back. We were almost like a supersized city and providing a range of services, to a large unincorporated area. We heard last night 215 could be 230. We can all argue academically what that number is, but you don't find that in any other county that I'm familiar with. And so we were a supersized city, and our array of services were designed that way. We're very much becoming more like our neighbors to the east, Multnomah County, in terms of social service provision. And folks are asking for more social services. That is a different model if we get there than we have employed in the past. I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. It's just true. And so the question in your strategic planning, you made that very clear, and I appreciate that comment, was that you need to start out with a plan. Well, we have a plan. It just needs to say, what are we going to modify it to? And back in the 80s, when we had the what I call tax wars and the difficulties with our city partners, they didn't like the idea that their residents were paying money to the county, and those funds were going not to those residents in cities, but outside of cities. They felt that that was inappropriate. And so we came up with this very levelized, that whether you're in Banks or Beaverton, whether you're in Hillsborough or Tualatin, whether you're in unincorporated areas all in between, everybody got the same level of service. You paid $1, you got the same level. That if that tenet changes, then I guess there has to be some discussions. But if we really want to start at the base, it's who are we? And I think you said that well. What are we becoming? And that's the strategic point that you got to be at. If I'm making hamburgers and now I want to also make tables and napkins, I need to say, okay, how do I do that? So if we are going to do things a little differently, we need to say what those are, and you very aptly said that. If we're going to have a different philosophy on how we charge, we need to say that, because the city groups will be interested in how is that dialing differently. And then after we get through those basic questions, which are pretty heady things to discuss, then we get to where you are taking us, which is, I think, on that path of let's making certain that we have checkpoints, let's have thoughtful discussion. So I can find no fault with anything you said. I mean, it's basic, let's do with anything you said. I mean, it's basic, let's do that and be mindful and be thoughtful and don't take it for granted. Everything you said is right, 100%. And I appreciate that. I also understand that my last comment is that we need to understand if we have an appetite for a different array of services, how those are going to be funded. And that's not part of a strategic plan, because you don't finance. You first figure out what you want to do. You second then say, how am I going to finance it? But I think you were tickling at that issue a little bit, I think, but I don't know it was as forthright as I just said, where you kind of say, well, if your appetite is huge, if you're going to eat that elephant in that example or whale, I'm not going to admit that I've heard that before, because that sounds like Greg made it sound like you're very old if you've heard that. So I don't want to say that. But if you have a big appetite, how are you going to finance that? And so those are all good discussions before we really get to where you are. But I'll stop. I think it was thoughtful. I know Clean Water Services and their presentations to us doing the same doggone thing about, who are we, what do we want to be, and what's it going to cost to get there. and how do we finance that? So thank you. I hope that you have whatever restful, probably in your case, 2 days of taking off before your next gig. You're just too young, too robust a guy to sit at home and watch TV. I know you're going to do something. I don't know what that's going to be, but good luck in whatever that endeavor is. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much. And I will tell you, you know, I've always said that the very first thing, and I know I've said it before, but I've always said the first thing you got to do is figure out what do you want to be when you grow up, and that continues to change organizationally as you go forward. And you know, the focus really is on those core county things that we have to do, and then beyond that, a negotiation of, okay, how are we going to provide any additional services, and then where does those resources come from? And that it's hard conversations to have, very, very difficult sometimes, because we can't be all things to all people, as the staff has heard me say repeatedly. But that to me is the very first step, and I know Tanya has begun the process of putting that in place, and I think a lot of good's going to come from that, and the direction that she's put you on is spot on.
So I'd like to sort of draw this into some discussion. I agree with a lot of what I've heard Commissioner Rogers share, but there are a couple of points where I fundamentally disagree. Washington County is not a supersized city. Washington County is a county government, but it also has been serving a significant urban unincorporated area. So there, I do agree with him that there are some supersized city services, right? Given the size of the UUAs, but the extent of the services provided to those UUAs is very focused and limited. But let's countywide service suite, or this way, and we've also had this UUA responsibility. And we do need to talk about what about that UUA responsibility and what is our vision for that, right? And he's totally spot on for that. But another area where I have a different viewpoint than Commissioner Rogers is and this is not news to him or anybody else. I've been pretty vocal about this all through 2017 and forward. I have seen, and I've lived in Washington County for 32 years. I have seen we're not evolving into different services. Our county-wide services have remained the same. What is different is how do we go about addressing those services? The county has shifted in my time here from my candidacy onward in acknowledging there is a different level of community need for some services, examples, affordable housing and homelessness. And we have evolved from doing the absolute minimum per state and federal requirements into evolving into addressing more of the community need as it exists here in the 2020s. So perhaps what we need to do is some of what we talked about last summer and the previous summer, Commissioner Rogers did. We need to have a basic board conversation about what do we want to be when we grow up, right? What is our current state? What is the future state? And it's not that the future state needs to be comparatively so different from the current state, but we have to be clearer about where we're at and where we're intending to go. I'm in absolute agreement with him on that. though I may use slightly different words and style for describing that than Commissioner Rogers. So this is a lot of where I see Commissioner Rogers and I in agreement about where we're at and where we're heading. Absolutely. Commissioner Rogers, let me pause here and see, what do you think? Am I on base on that, or what?
I think we can use different terminology and different terms of art in describing, but in my conversations with you, I don't know that we're very far apart.
Right.
I think we can say, in my super city reference is probably a poor choice of words, but we were in those unincorporated areas, and that was the genesis of the whole strategic plan. We were providing lots of services that the cities were paying for.
Yep.
And so they sat there and said, no more. I mean, we've
Right.
got either we have a reduced county rate, or if you're going to provide those, and you're going to provide them to us as well. And so, yeah, I don't think we're going to be far apart, but I think, and this is to Rodney, we have to start the dialogue.
Yep.
That's where we got to start. And then we got districts, and I'll just stop with it, like Pam's, who have a huge unincorporated area, a huge need, and it's unique. I keep saying that, and that she may not like that term, but I think it's very unique in terms of its needs and how we address it and where they're going. And so, yeah, just the conversation needs to be had.
Yep. And we don't have to wait for our strategic planning effort to do that. Right. And we do need to get clear as a work group on where we're at and where we are hoping to head, at least in terms of that clarity, not necessarily in terms of the absolute solutions state. Yes, Commissioner Treese.
I would just like to add to that you said we don't necessarily have to wait for the strategic plan. I think that it's incumbent upon us to have that discussion as we move toward the strategic plan. So I would agree.
And I've heard the analogy of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. But I'd also like to propose the theme that what we're attempting to do can be done. It's evolutionary, not revolutionary, right? We're not trying to tear out the current foundation and build, this corner, like piles for a bridge, or, until we eventually have the complete foundation. We can't afford to do that. We need to continue on as an organization, but we can take on different aspects of what we've either been missing or want to revamp in a Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 sort of way. So I just wanted to leave that thought out there. I do have a few questions about the presentation, if I might. Mr. Rhodes, could you help me better understand the role of enterprise resource planning, right? It's a business management set of software. I'm having come from a software tech background, I'm more comfortable in understanding it as that. But where I have difficulty is understanding ERP as it relates to government versus ERP for a private company, right? Because from the private sector, yes, you have all your IT, your finance, procurement, but you also have your customer resource management, your CRM aspect. And so it's like, okay, how do we, there are different models used to describe what ERP is. And through your presentation, I clearly have the message of we have to invest in new ERP systems. Okay, but do we buy a whole huge packet set? Or do we start with different pieces? I need some more grounding
Right.
on that and the role, not from the standpoint of as if I'm trying to be an ACA or department manager, but rather what do I need to understand as a board member about the importance of it, the need to invest in it, and for me, how I need to be patient with regard to it being procured and deployed.
So I'll share with you Rodney's past experience with ERP solutions, and I know Tanya has also had them. The very first thing we have to do is begin what I call a requirements gathering process. And that identifies, okay, where are our system deficiencies? What do we need to do to address those deficiencies? That then becomes the basis to begin building a requirement or an RFP that specifically says, here's what we're looking for, here's what we're trying to address, and here's how we want to improve what we currently do. It's very easy to build an ERP solution that mirrors what we currently do, but that's just a big waste of money, in my opinion. What you want to do is begin a process where I talked about taking off the blinders. It's really more of removing the current mindset of what we do organizationally and the processes that we do, and begin to open our minds to where do we want to go in the future? How do we improve our current processes today? And how is this solution going to provide the ability for us to do that? And so that to me is really the beginning stages of going through looking at selecting an ERP solution. I have seen a number of organizations implement a new solution, looks great, but it's the same thing we've always done. And we're right back to square one. We have to be strategic, we have to be mindful, and we have to be forward thinking in order to begin to build that requirement for the new system that takes us to the next level organizationally. Does that help?
So next steps in this conversation, we just had an internal kickoff discussion with our IT team. We will be bringing back more information to your board. I think, Chair, to your question, our software solutions as a county is really a spider web. And so our IT team has created kind of a graphic that helps depict this to help identify, to your question, what is an ERP? The challenge that Rodney and I have in addressing that is what is an ERP is different for each organization and where you start. And so what Rodney was getting to, the first phase of that work is engaging with a consultant to help us develop an RFP. And in my experience, we need to invest the dollars on the front end to design a different future on the back end, because otherwise, and I've had the experience that we didn't do that, and we ended up investing more resources at the end because we were just duplicating systems, and we weren't challenging kind of how we were operating our business. And that's where there are firms that specialize in this. I will just also say we have an opportunity because we are not the only local government in Washington County having this discussion right now. And so how we can also leverage relationships with other government entities to get best bang of the buck of consulting resources and go big is a conversation that I'm having with a few city managers right now.
Well, so what I'm struggling with is I've heard, and other board members, right, in our 3.5 years have heard about how we have different systems. They're not necessarily integrated and connected. So just to get some reports, it takes too long because different systems, they're different databases, different information in different places, you know, and room for error once you have that human element to try and knit these pieces together. So, you know, some of it's with HR, some of it's with finance, you know, so on and so forth. And I'm not trying to be the keeper of those needs by any stretch of the imagination. So I assume that Ms. Angie, you and your exec staff and the other subject matter experts you need to draw on have the idea of what are some of the bigger systems you need to get in place sort of first, and what are the characteristics of an ERP system and an integrated system to meet the needs of Washington County as you're familiar with it today, and our initial thoughts in terms of where we're heading.
That's a fair analogy. And
Okay.
this is a larger kind of conversation that I want to come back to your board on, because
Yeah.
this is a significant investment. And it is an opportunity to really look at how we're using staff resources. And Commissioner Rogers, I know you've asked for opportunities to automate or look at AI. I will say, going through this budget process, I learned even more, and we are having staff, because of our systems, work on inputting data, because we don't have a ERP system in place that automatically does that work. And so for us to transition to outcomes focused and data analysis, we need the systems in place, not just the people. And so this is a very robust discussion that we need to have with your board, and that our team is working on putting that together so you have a better understanding of what we see at this time of our current state. And I emphasized we, because it's important to also work with outside consultants that have expertise in this area, because I bet there's things that I don't even see yet that they will come up, they will determine our opportunities as we move forward. What are the systems that I am most concerned about? Our HR related systems and our finance related systems.
So is this one of the topics that we'll be touching on? You and I have talked about the topics that you'll be bringing in July and potentially September, October. So am I correct in understanding these are some of the discussions we'll be having through the remainder of this year? Or is this something we're going to have to take a deep breath as a board, hold our breath until first half of next year?
No, it is not on your rolling agenda or the roundtable yet, because we just had the meeting this week. So I'm working with the staff to get that program in the proposed budget. There are funds set aside in the ITS projects to do the first phase of this work. And so that's why coming forward to your board and getting input and direction is important at this time.
Well, one reason why I'm asking is because it's been a bit of 3.5 years of hearing, not quite this black and white, but no, we can't do it. No, we can't do it yet. No, we can't do it yet. We need to have other stuff in place. No, we can't do it. And it's like, I'm trying to figure out what is the roadmap for us to be on that path to, yes, we can, and yes, we are. And so that's the level of thematic understanding I'm trying to get.
You will see that in the presentation when we come back to your board, and how a typical ERP replacement happens in phases and what that phased work looks like.
Terrific, terrific. Okay, so I do have a few questions on some of the slides. We took care of one of them. Thank you. On slide 10, I think this may have, I can't remember. Could we show slide 10, please? Thank you. When you're talking about positions and moving, reallocating, it struck me that really part of what I see as a bit of a shift here is somewhat of rethinking the work that is being done, potentially redesigning that work, and work groups, you know, how the work groups are going about delivering their services and utilizing team members and team member expertise and providing career growth opportunities for team members, you know, as we're talking about more of that workforce career development versus a style of just adding more FTE, right? Oh, well, we're growing population, so we add FTE. And it's like, well, wait a second. Let's look at our productivity and how we're how our workforce is being used to deliver those services. And there may be some process improvement. There may be some old systems we've been doing the way we've been doing things that, well, we don't have to keep doing it that way. They're better, faster, cheaper, not to overuse that statement, to do it. Am I in the right space, Mr. Rhodes, for what you were getting at?
Yes, you're spot on. I think that one thing that has always driven me crazy is when people say, well, the way we've always done it, or, you know, in the past we did this, and so that's why we're doing it today. And so, you know, as the county progresses and evolves organizationally, that may not be the best model or approach that we use. And that's why I stress becoming an outcomes-oriented organization, because if you can't show success with what you're doing and the resources that you have available, I'm not talking about expanding something. I'm just talking about what you're doing today. If you can't show success in that regard, then it begs the question of, do we need to continue doing it? And again, it goes back to those priorities. It goes back to being able to demonstrate a team-oriented environment that works together to understand each role that we play. And in some instances, does it make sense to reallocate resources in other areas where the higher priorities might be? And so all of that plays into this as we're talking about looking at the opportunity to revamp the budget process. The way we've always done it, in my opinion, is not the way it should be done going forward. Now, that's not my decision to make, it's just my assessment. But it is very challenging for internal staff. It's very challenging for the process of evaluation. It's very challenging to look at where have we been successful versus we're just going to continue to do what we've always done kind of approach. And so that's where those outcomes really become very critical. But it starts with the establishment of the goals and objectives for the organization.
Thank you for sharing your hot button phrases I can relate to. to that. My next question is on slide 12. So using technology to improve information sharing, communication, and decision-making, that's the third bullet. So I would, and I will follow up on the article, but I'm wondering if you could bring to life for me a little bit more this idea of using technology, because there are two things that came to mind for me. Thinking as a board member, what do we need to support? What do we need in order to support the use of technology to improve information sharing, communication, and decision-making? And also the question of specifically, what do you think we need to do? So if that's a conversation better left for offline, fine, but there's something about that use of technology that I really want to make sure that we, as a board work group and with our senior staff, have a common understanding of, and that we're able to ensure that our entire workforce has an understanding of too. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say to any organization that I've visited with regarding this is don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of technology change. Don't be afraid of how to use the technology. Embrace it. But understand that what we've talked about with the ERP solution, for example, it's not going to be a cheap endeavor, but it's resources well spent, because it ties right back to this bullet. Because if you're able to extract this information accurately and timely and use technology as a communications tool, then you are all the better for it. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. There's a process, as we talked about, the requirements gathering process, and getting consulting help to make all of those things happen. And I'm happy to have an offline discussion if you'd like regarding my thoughts on a process. But all of the things that we've talked about from a technology standpoint goes directly to this bullet, and being able to use that technology to provide that information both internally and externally, communicate out through those dashboards or through those reports, and help the senior management make better informed decisions on what we need to do going forward, both from a resource allocation perspective and also from an operational perspective. So that to me just is really where this bullet speaks to.
Yeah, you're really speaking my language, or really, that's not the right way to put it. I can relate to what you're saying or identify with it, because I know that we have a lot of information across the county. Where we're really struggling is, how do we extract value out of that information?
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do much better. So thank you. Slide 15, my second to the last question. Ms. Angie, I'm assuming that you'll be coming to us with a plan for how you want to go about organizational studies.
Yes, that'll be part of our, I believe, our July roundtable discussion.
Great.
What the next organizational study. They're called studies or assessments.
Yep.
Will be HR. We are in the process of finalizing that RFP. Rodney does really highlight how do we manage these studies so there's not bias from the department. Also, how do we create a process that is similar across the organization, from stakeholder feedback, from a process, keeping in mind we have very different business lines though. So that is also what we're in the process of developing. This is also part of culture. In order to evolve ourselves, we need to look at our current state, then we improve, and then we look at our current state again. So this is really a continuous process as we design the future. And that's part of the culture of the organization that myself, as well as the ACAs, are really trying to embed, that this will be continual, just as the other points that Rodney had brought up, because we will continue to evolve.
Thank you.
Mhm.
My last question is on slide 19. And this is let me share some information first and then get to my question. So I was struck in joining the board in 2019 from my prior elected experience at Metro. And then prior to that, I was in high tech. I was struck by a few things that, from my vantage point, didn't exist. Or, well, I'll just say it that way. Or the level of information that we were provided as the board wasn't as comprehensive at a high level or as strategic as I had expected it to be. For example, retirement succession planning. You know, there are recruiting costs, right? Time and money to make sure that much has been made of the quote unquote silver tsunami. It's not a tsunami because it doesn't come back in, right? But how do you go through workforce transitions? And as an agency, we are now on a much better path for career development, career growth opportunities within the organization. Capital needs, right? I started asking questions about the then adopted budget before going in, and you know, there were just lists in different places, but they weren't collected, they were brought to the board as a plan, so on and so forth. And then long-term financial planning, way too much for my tastes, was ad hoc. So where this all boils down to is, for me on this slide, Mr. Rhodes, I was shocked that there wasn't a facilities master plan. And I inquired about that as part of my onboarding and discussions with the management team and also with the IT team. So fundamentally, I was surprised to not see that having a comprehensive, first ever facilities master plan isn't on your in conclusion list. And it may be because it's underway now, right, with the new facilities manager. So I just needed you to come back to that.
Sure. So the intent of this particular slide was really more to highlight the what I call those high level areas. If you notice on slide 18, we talk about facilities and IT master planning. I think what I can say about that is that, in my opinion, a facilities master plan in conjunction with a staffing plan is critical for future long-range financial planning, and it's directly tied into that second bullet point.
Got it.
And so, to me, if we really need to take a look at where are those facilities needs, I think I said a few months ago, the days of brick and mortar buildings are maybe behind us, or of the rethinking of that.
Yeah.
I've kind of come around to the conclusion that may not necessarily be the case. I think there is always going to be a need, but it is, again, it ties back to that second bullet point, but not only from an IT or a facilities perspective, but also from a staffing model, because that directly impacts your facilities needs. So if I were going to make a recommendation, I would look at your facility or your staffing plan and then tie that directly back into your facilities plan, and develop standards around your facilities. What's office space look like? Do we hotel? Do we share space in terms of cubes? Do we establish standards for different sized offices, for example? All of those things are part of a staffing and facilities plan that enables you to then say, okay, now where do we go in terms of the next steps to build those facilities in a prioritized manner, that gives us an opportunity to then be able to develop a financing plan, and they all tie back together to this long-range financial and strategic plan.
Thank you. I agree with that level of information. I'm just wanting the agency to take ownership of the bigger ticket items that some had not gotten the level of attention that, in my opinion, were needed, right? A new courthouse, and the fact that the county chose to not participate in the state activities for planning in 2016 as it had done in 2008. And so now we're way behind compared to our peers and need to hurry up. Well, we're at least in line now. Similarly with a jail, that was kept in a few people's minds, but had not been advanced to the board, including to the board as of 2019, when I created a laundry list of different facilities needs. So thank you. I'm in line with you. I get it. So,
okay.
So in closing, I really want to share the level of appreciation and gratitude that some of my colleagues have also expressed already. It has been just phenomenal, a phenomenal experience of having you help us as an agency get the job done that has been needed during your tenure. And that includes that huge ARPA dollar investment, right? And all the processes needed in place for that, and getting those dollars out to community. But also getting the benefit of your observations. And I have really appreciated your working in partnership with Ms. Angie and the other team members, and also ensuring that the finance team knows that we appreciate their work and the other observations that you shared in your slide set. I'm really excited about our work together in the months ahead, and really look forward to that. Are there any other commissioner comments in closing at this time? Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
This is Rodney. One observation and then one request. My observation is since you came from the utility side, you understand that under Oregon statutes, we have all these expenditures that we have to do on an annual basis. We expense them. On the utility side, we capitalize them. And so Some of your presentation was saying, do we make these expenses, or I call them investments. I mean, the IT systems are, if we didn't have to expense them, we'd see the value over a period of time. But under Oregon law, we have to do that. That's my observation. My request is you and I might have a slightly different view of what we're going to need to do in terms of planning for potential, what I call cuts, and you can use whatever term you want. You were estimating, I think, maybe 10, 15 million, and I need to understand your logic. I take about 1.3 bill. We can do whatever billion you want to come at. 1% is about 13 million a year. And our costs, I don't think we've seen what they're going to be. I think they're going to be 8, 9, 10%, just with the economy and slowdown. And so in our AV and under our caps on taxing, we're never going to make that margin narrower. So to me, it looks like we could have somewhere in the vicinity of anywhere from 20 to 30 million a year that we're going to have to take a look at in the next couple of years of how are we going to deal with that with increased costs. So my request is that if I've misstated or looked at something different, I'd sure appreciate your thoughts. But there's some significant challenges that this board's going to have to deal with the next couple of years.
And I think part of that with financial forecasting, we also want to make sure that, yes, we do have the benefit of Rodney's expertise. I'm managing to the clock a little bit here, folks, because we have other topics. I do think it's a worthy conversation. Also, we do have Mr. Munn, Greg Munn, on board, and is a topic that we want to make sure that the full board has the benefit of understanding, because it is a key point, Commissioner Rogers, that you're making in us understanding the capacities, the limits, and the navigable opportunities. So thank you. I'm sorry to have to push for closure, but we do need to take a 15-minute break here, and then we have 2 topics still. COVID-19 update for at least a half an hour and another hour for the forestry topic. So it looks like we could be going until, do you want to take a break and then push through till 1 o'clock, folks, or what would you like to do? Thumbs up from Roy. Thumbs up from Pam. Thumbs up. Okay. So Ms. Angie, could you help us with a smoother transition here on the closure on this topic, and then we'll take that 15-minute break.
So thank you, Chair. So Rodney will be here through the end of June. He will be working closely with Greg, not only on the transition, but really putting into place what fine tuning our financial forecast. Chair, as you had brought up, and as well, you, Commissioner Rogers. So that's kind of what the next month looks like. And as I said, he's been willing to stay on as we needed and continue his operations as a consultant for us. There will be further discussions in the months ahead around strategic planning and financial sustainability. I appreciate the board's attention today and the importance of these topics. And you can feel free to reach out to myself or Rodney to have follow-up discussions or inquiries on any of today's materials. And with that, Chair, I think we are at 11:10. So if we take a 15-minute break, we'd be coming back at 11:25.
Terrific. So I recommend if folks need to get a snack, so your stomachs aren't growling too much as we push through to about 1 o'clock. That would be excellent. All righty. See you back here at 11:25 then. Thank you. Good job, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you very much for your time.
Welcome back, commissioners, and back to you, Chair Harrington. All right, double mute, Chair.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We have two more items on our roundtable agenda today. The next one is a COVID-19 update with Health and Human Services. And I want to start by really thanking the team for joining us today and putting information together for us. We are in a very different place here in June of 2022 than we were in June of 2021. I remember in June, I had just finished getting my first 2 course of vaccinations in the month of May and was really looking forward to a summer, right? Only to get slammed essentially up against the wall by a Delta wave, which did prepare me better for the subsequent Omicron wave later in the year. But in June of 2021, we were in a much better place than we were in June of 2020 as well. And I want to say, extend great appreciation for our team because of the information that you ensured we as board members, but also community members have, as well as the phenomenal services that you've provided has really been so very helpful. So welcome, and please take it away. Ms. Kyle, if you could kick us off, that would be great.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Board. Marnie Kyle, I'm one of the Assistant County Administrators, and it's really my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Christina Baumann, our Health Officer, as well as Marie Bowman Davis, who is our Public Health Division Managers. They have been leaders not only, as you shared, Chair Harrington, in Washington County, but they have been leaders throughout our region and the state. And they're here today to provide you an update, just a reminder about the new CDC community levels and what that means for Washington County, answer some common questions, and really help us to look forward as we consider some of the different planning implications. So with that, I will turn it over to, I believe Marie is going to kick us off.
Thank you, Marnie. Good morning, Board of County Commissioners. Thank you for inviting us to present today. And thank you for your appreciation, Chair Harrington, on behalf of the commissioners, and thank you, Marnie, for the introduction. For the record, my name is Marie Bowman Davis, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Public Health Division Manager and Local Public Health Administrator appointed by your board. Today, I am joined, as Marnie said, by our Health Officer, Dr. Christina Baumann, to present this important update about COVID. So, as you mentioned, a lot has changed since our last year and also since our last presentation in February. Since that last presentation, the United States has moved out of the emergency phase into a new phase of the pandemic. To quote the Oregon Health Authority from their Resilience in Support of Equity, or RISE framework that was released in March, in this new phase of the pandemic, state and local health officials can shift their focus from an initial emergency response towards a supporting role for community and personal decision-making. I wanted to take a moment to summarize some key Oregon Health Authority reported COVID-19 outcomes that were supported by your leadership as commissioners and as the local public health authority, as well as with your Tranche 1 ARPA investments. Oregon's COVID-19 strategy saved lives and kept cases and hospitalizations lower than in other states. Oregon ranked second lowest among states, including Washington, D.C., in COVID-19 cases per 100,000. Ranked 7th in COVID-19 deaths per 100,000. Nearly 5,800 deaths were prevented here in Oregon, statewide. We ranked 18th in percentage of residents who are fully vaccinated and ranked 4th lowest in the rate of peak hospitalizations during that Omicron surge. The availability of vaccines, boosters, lab testing, and home-based tests have been key tools over the past few months, supporting the removal of some mask mandates, as in public spaces and schools, and most importantly, our transition out of the emergency phase. So today we will review some tools, as Marty mentioned, that are available in this phase that can support our community and individual decision-making. We'll look at epidemiological trend data and discuss our ability to forecast. We know there's still some unpredictability with regards to new variants, vaccinations for younger children, those under 5, and any ongoing need for boosters. Thus, we welcome an opportunity to come back and provide future updates. Next slide, please. So in this phase, we are monitoring COVID-19 using the new CDC Community Levels website, which focuses on case and hospitalization data. Independent from hospitalizations, once we go over 200 cases per 100,000 people, we move from green, which is low, to medium, community level, which is yellow. So this CDC community level framework allows the community to know what are the recommended precautions at each level, and they can identify the level in their own community. Next slide, please. Each community level metric has a standardized set of recommendations which we follow, promote, and encourage others to use. As levels increase, so do the recommendations for preventative actions. We continue to focus our messaging on protecting those at highest risk for severe illness. This information is also helpful for school and business planning. For example, it can help with restocking masks and hand sanitizer stations, identifying available tests, and planning for absences. Next slide, please. Community levels are updated weekly on Thursday evenings, so a new update should be available tonight. As of May 25th, Washington County was in medium and had been for at least a few weeks. In medium, vaccinations, testing, and mask wearing, if symptomatic or on public transportation, is encouraged for the general public. Having a plan for rapid testing and treatment is also valuable. People at high risk for severe illness are encouraged to wear masks indoors in public and take additional precautions such as monitoring for symptoms. If the case rate remains above 200 per 100,000 and new COVID-19 admissions increase to 10 per 100,000, Washington County will move to high. In high, CDC recommends wearing masks indoors in public for everyone. Next slide, please. Staying up to date with COVID-19 vaccinations is recommended at all levels. This month, boosters became available for everyone ages 5 and older. Washington County Public Health regularly updates our COVID-19 English and Spanish web pages with vaccine and testing availability information. First series of vaccinations are most important. Protecting from severe disease they hold up well over time, and boosters give additional protection. Everyone 12 and older should also be able to get their first booster, and now boosters are available for kids 5 to 12. Adults over 50 may also get a second booster. It is especially important for immunocompromised and people at high risk for severe illness to get their initial shots and boosters. I will now turn it over to our health officer, Dr. Bauman. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman-Davis. So Dr. Bowman-Davis has talked a bit about how we know, how we experience COVID-19 right now, the current status. And I want to talk a little bit more about how we can potentially anticipate what is to come. We don't have a long view on this, but we do have some insights that help us make plans for the months to come. COVID is still here, it's still evolving, and we all do need to be ready for some unpredictability. And we also need to maintain our disease investigation and keep our response abilities up to date and ready to implement. I'm going to give you an overview in the next few slides on how public health will maintain situational awareness and readiness. Next slide. COVID-19 is still a nationally notifiable disease with requirements for disease control and prevention. Reporting is established in rule in Oregon, and disease investigation and response is described in the Oregon Investigative Guidelines. Information continues to be collected by local public health and submitted to the Oregon Health Authority. Next slide. The COVID-19 investigative guidelines, they are important for outlining standards for disease control and prevention. Your local public health's responsibilities include maintaining data collection systems and the quality of the data so that we can have good surveillance. We also do investigations of cases, contacts, and outbreaks, and provide important guidance on testing, isolation and quarantine, and infection control and prevention. The data quality and systems are absolutely critical for both our local and state understanding of COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and outbreaks in our communities. They're also used to identify trends and are used to inform the CDC community levels and associated guidelines for precautions that were outlined earlier. Next slide. The information that local public health continues to collect helps inform what we know about patterns and changes in the virus activity, the severity of illness, and the effectiveness of vaccines and boosters over time, as you can see in this graph. Vaccines and boosters continue to be a very important tool in reducing the risk of COVID disease, hospitalizations, and death. Next slide. Trends can also help us with predicting what is likely to come and how our response may need to change. From our Oregon trend data, we can see that we will likely continue to have seasonal surges of cases in the fall, in the spring, and in the winter. Next slide. To predict the impacts of these surges of cases on our health systems, we can look to forecasts coming out of OHSU. Predictions are updated every 2 weeks and include considerations such as the severity and spread of variants, our vaccination rates, immune escape, and protective behaviors such as masking. We rely on these bi-monthly predictions to assess the possible impacts of the seasonal surges with a specific focus on our health system. These predictions are from the 20th of last month, and they will be updated again tomorrow on June 3rd. What you see here in the black dots are the actual hospitalization counts, and the red is what is forecasted to come. So you can see we're anticipating that hospitalizations will peak the week of June 9th and go down from there, and that the amplitude of that peak is not anticipated to be anywhere near what we experienced with Delta and Omicron. Next slide. Dr. Bowman-Davis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. As seen from the previous slides, vaccinations and boosters are important and effective at reducing the burden of disease in our community and in our hospitals. We continue to support local vaccination efforts and are working to address the disparities that you see here highlighted in this graph. I am happy to report that we are making progress at addressing these disparities. Since our February presentation, we have seen increases in this first box that says %1 dose. So we've seen about a 2 to 3 percentage point increase among our Black and African American and our Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx community members. In the boosters, we have seen about a 10 percentage point increase among these groups. As we know, lower vaccination rates contribute to inequities in disease burden, such as length and severity of illness and economic burdens associated with missed days of work. Thus, we will continue our vaccination efforts to address the inequities so that adults in every community have the opportunity to reach the recommended goal of 80%. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what we're anticipating at this point for summer and fall. We will have multiple viruses as we have been experiencing: influenza, circulating, norovirus. Those are spreading in addition to COVID-19. we'll have continued decreases in reporting of COVID-19 results from increased home tests. So those home tests that are available, they are fantastic tools. However, they're not required to be reported to local public health. So they don't end up in our case counts. So that makes our case counts a little bit less reliable for disease burden in the community. However, continuing to focus on the hospitalizations that we saw in the community level, as well as the deaths that are measured are also a little bit more reflective of what's happening in our community. The FDA panel meets this month on June 15th to consider Moderna and Pfizer data for infant and young children vaccinations. Based on our past experience, once decisions are made by the FDA, there are a series of national and state decisions that are quickly made soon after to make those vaccinations available. So our state and primary care partners are prepared for what we call the little peds vaccinations, and they will likely be given by most providers. There will be ongoing challenges related to access to care. Therefore, we need to continue to lead with and center equity as we uplift these vaccinations. So for example, when we're thinking about COVID-19 testing and vaccinations, we are currently working on plans to support the new Virginia Garcia COVID Center, which should increase access and availability and reduce those challenges in our community. So as discussed, there will be new variants and ongoing recommendations to mask, especially when community levels are high. In medium and high community levels, we'll continue to see workforce and supply chain disruptions. And we'll continue to monitor and promote vaccinations and boosters as new information becomes available. Next slide, please. So as we continue to engage in our COVID-19 response and recovery, there are some considerations for planning. We are operating in these seasonal surges, as Dr. Baumann pointed out. However, impacts will vary. So we'll continue to closely watch the modeling and predictions from OHSU, as well as the CDC. There'll be ongoing burden of COVID-19 that is differentially impacting marginalized communities. So we will stay connected to communities with the support of our trusted partners and adjust our programs and services to meet their changing needs and address disparities. Since there are still new variants and the impacts are unpredictable, more than a few weeks in advance, we'll need to maintain a flexible and responsive system. We also need to continue to proactively engage with communities to co-create strategies to prevent future inequities. Next slide, please. Again, I just want to take an opportunity to thank the board, our community partners, our service partners, partner jurisdictions, our ARPA program staff, and our public health staff for our continued work in the pandemic response and recovery. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, team. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, to our experts here, I think we all held the line. We all got our vaccinations. We all have promoted programs, but there's now becoming a bit of pushback from a lot of folks saying that these were really not immunizations because you didn't immunize against it. You can still repeatedly get it. And there are certain reported cases of the, I keep calling it vaccination because that's what I got, but the vaccinations providing certain issues, health issues in certain individuals. So that once again, as we go into the community and we hear these things, what would you give us as a message that yes, that these don't immunize us, but it decreases the severity in case we catch it, and these aren't, this vaccine isn't creating everything from, I don't even know how to describe it, but all kinds of strange things happening in people's bodies. So give me some ammunition. So tell me what you would respond on those particular cases.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Rogers. I think you hit upon some of the really key messages there. The primary vaccination series that many people have undertaken continues to maintain protection against severe disease. That is the key objective of these vaccinations. And the virus will continue to change. And so the vaccine is going to need to be taken again as boosters to refuel that immune response, to maintain that immune protection. And also looking forward, we may see some changes to the vaccine formulation so it can better protect against new variants that are coming out with fairly regular rapidity, as we've been seeing in these various surges. So it's a changing landscape, but I think we can all take a lot of reassurance in seeing how well the vaccine does protect against severe disease and the effectiveness of boosters at adding an extra layer of protection for those who are most at risk.
Thank you, Dr. Baumann. I would just like to also add that one of our presentation slides, I think, did a great job of differentiating the impact with hospitalizations, right? So being full series, being unvaccinated, and being boosted, and how being vaccinated and boosted really has reduced our lower hospitalization rates. And so that is another added benefit.
And Marie, would you like to comment on the second question? I think that the first question was well handled. The second one, is there any evidence that the vaccine for certain individuals mutates into all kinds of everything from liver to other issues that people are having? Is there any evidence at all that I mean, I could take aspirin and it's going to affect me different than you. So I mean, there's this new, I guess, thought that somehow certain people are impacted in a terrible way. So take your chances. Do you want some terrible disease or do you want COVID? And I don't think that's the choice. So can you help me with that one?
Sure, Commissioner Rogers. Vaccines are under a much higher level of scrutiny than any medications that we have. There is ongoing surveillance to identify the most rare of adverse events that people can experience. Some of those that have come up are inflammation of the heart and muscle and the lining around the heart. And when that data has really been looked into, those numbers are extraordinarily low and absolutely lower than the risk of similar inflammation you can get from getting infected with the virus. So the risk benefit is absolutely in favor of getting vaccines, and any adverse events continue to be on a very low level. We have seen two different types of vaccines that have been implemented. The mRNA based vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, have by far been showing better effectiveness and better safety profiles than the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So recommendations continue to be evolving over time. And absolutely, there's a strong emphasis on ensuring the safety and effectiveness of these regimens.
I'd like to add that I have found the frequently asked questions documents that you've made available to each and every one of us through the Washington County COVID pages to be really helpful, and is where I direct people to find answers to their questions. So I don't have to remember those answers. Rather, I remember where to find reliable resources for addressing the various questions that people may have in order to be informed for themselves. So thank you for that. Commissioner Treese, I know you had your hand up earlier too. Please go ahead.
Thank you. It was really interesting to me to look at the forecast, and it just seems like it's amazingly accurate. Is that unusual for this type of situation? When I looked at the red on the far left, there's just a little bit, and the line, the infection rate and the line and the forecast just are in sync the whole time. Is that typical?
I think I'm muted. Okay. Thank you for that question, Commissioner Treese, and for that observation. We are really lucky here in Oregon to have Dr. Peter Graven and his team at OHSU working on these predictions. Not every state is as lucky. And so there's really not a point of comparison state by state, but the accuracy, I think, is really important to point out. It's a trust. It's a resource we can trust, and it's reliable.
Well, and I think what that tells me is, as we watch that, based on the history, as we watch that forecast moving forward, we can have a lot of confidence again in that forecast. And the other piece that was interesting to me is the graph, and I don't remember what page it was, that shows the in our BIPOC community, what the percentages are for the first dose, the second dose, and then the boosters. And I'm just so pleased at the work that we've done in focusing and with our BIPOC community leaders, with our CBOs, to get those numbers where they are. So that's something that I just want to highlight and say thank you so much. I think it speaks volumes for the relationships that we've worked to build. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. And again, there's so much gratitude to the board. Your ARPA investments have helped us with the ability to have those strong relationships with the community, to partner with them in order to uplift those vaccination resources in a culturally responsive and linguistically appropriate, equity-centered way.
Commissioner Willie or Commissioner Fye, any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, I just have two. And the first topic is farm workers. This is the time of year where we see a growth in our agriculture-based farm workers population increased. We have many farm workers throughout the year, but we have a broad growth of that during the summer and fall seasons as well with the seasonal crops. And I've seen you do fantastic work these last 2 years. And now that there's booster availability that the FDA is working through with children 6 months of age or older, how exciting. So it's a comment, not a question, but you're happy to speak. I'm happy to have you speak to any aspect of this. I really appreciated how you were pre-planning in prior years, how you engaged in that culturally relevant and language specific way. But I saw you last year also being in such partnership with our library folks, right? And now this year, I just wish you such good wishes in ensuring that we get as many adults boosted, but also all those children vaccinated as much as possible. So thank you in advance for that huge work, and do feel free to comment at all about the farm worker response.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, for the gratitude and the recognition. Washington County was recognized. I remember just soon after I came on, you were there with our governor being recognized for being the first one in the county to have 80% of 18 and older, right? And so we're striving to continue to work with communities, and we do have plans with our farm worker communities and collaboration with our partners, as well as our state partners, right? This is a state-local partnership too. And so we are excited to continue leveraging our authentic relationships that we built with communities to provide them access to the resources and services they need and deserve. Thank you.
So my second comment is the three of you had a unique set of experiences with me in 2020, but also in 2021. You were just absolutely trusted partners of mine, to the extent that you saw me reduced to puddles of tears in trying to problem solve how I could possibly reduce the suffering of one more family or prevent one more death. So 2022 may be the year of no tears. I'll take that as a win. What I'm trying to get to is, in continuing to talk with fellow elected officials, I think many of them are struggling a little bit to understand what level of funding does the county need to ensure it has for a successful and responsive COVID support system as living with this virus continues to evolve. And as I really want to thank Ms. Kyle for making sure that over these years, we've understood how as a country, not just as a county, not just as a state, but as a country, how we have underfunded our public health systems. And you know, we're all thankful for the incredible work that you've all done. And so I just wanted to ask if there's, and Ms. Angie, you may have some information coming to us soon with regard to ARPA Tranche 1. But there's a sort of an urban legend, if I can label it that the county didn't, and we as the board didn't direct enough funding back in 2020 out of CRF to the cities for economic relief. And why on earth did we hold back was the phraseology, so much funding for public health then? And, you know, I'm sort of aghast thinking, whoa, wait a second. Don't you remember how many families we supported to stay home? So they got food and prescriptions and support to do the right thing, to stay alive and to stay healthy and to prevent the rest of us from getting sick. Anyway, so to you, the team, and this includes Ms. Angie, are there any thoughts that you want to share with us today, or any future timeframes, maybe just that it's coming, to help tell that story about how you have ensured that we are funding the work that we need you to do to be a healthy and thriving community, and to go from here into the great unknown together?
So Chair Harrington, that's a great question. And it's really teeing up our ARPA Tranche 2 discussion that we are preparing for this summer. And as you were talking, I was trying to scan my rolling agenda quickly, and I couldn't listen carefully and read the fine print to say what date that is, that we're coming back to your board, but it is this summer, I believe August it is. But what we are looking at is building on the work that the team has shared today, and what is the future state, knowing that we are going to be living with COVID, and knowing that we have mandated response that the state requires us to do, and your board and the team has ensured that we act with an equity lens, a culturally specific, inclusive based on data. And so, as your board is aware, I've shared my concern, what happens at the end of 2024? And so we are putting together what we see as our mandated response so that we can have an informed discussion that we can bring to light, and also have those discussions with our legislative partners as well, because I'm just going to say I'm uncertain of what the future holds. I think we can look at predictions, and we need to really have some financial planning to ensure that we continue to protect and support our community. So more to come.
2024 used to sound like a long time away. It's in the next 2 years, folks. Wow. Yeah, we've come a long way. Thank you so much to the team. Thanks for giving us an update today. It is quite a good one compared to where we were last year, and even where we were last February or end of January, whenever we had that last one. Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anything to close, Ms. Kyle, Ms. Bowman Davis, Dr. Bowman Davis, or Dr. Bowman?
Nothing from me, but just again, thank you for your time, and Marie and Christina, thank you so much for the great information and presentation.
And Chair, if I could add, thank you, Clerk Moss, for scanning the rolling agenda faster than I could. And it's actually in July. It's coming sooner that the ARPA Tranche 2 framework will be coming back to the board for discussion.
Woohoo! Great. All righty. Well, we're going to shift topics entirely and dive into forestry. So I'd like to welcome Erin Doyle, and please, Erin, take it away.
Thank you. Technically, good afternoon, board. Erin Doyle, Senior Government Relations Manager, and I am going to attempt to share my screen to relieve some of the burden on Clerk Moss right now. So pardon all the windows. I will turn this into my slideshow in a moment. So we are here today to discuss the County Forest Trust lands, and I am only here to provide you with the background information I think is necessary to help you have your conversation about how this board wants to proceed in discussions specifically around the Habitat Conservation Plan and the draft environmental impact statement that that supports that Habitat Conservation Plan at the federal level. So in order to do that, I've set up just a hopefully quick but useful PowerPoint presentation, but you also have a more detailed memo that was a lot of words, so I don't expect you to have read it all, but I'm going to try not to repeat it too much. But first, I just want to set up that background of where these trust lands are in Washington County, how much they represent of the overall acreage. And then I want to give a little bit of detail about the Habitat Conservation Plan, its purpose and goals and what it calls for, and then talk about what the draft environmental impact statement says related to that proposed Habitat Conservation Plan, and then provide you a timeline of the next steps, because that will impact the decisions that you want to make about when and where and how to engage in this process with the state. So first, to literally ground you, I'm going to establish where these trust lands are and what purposes they serve relative to the greater picture of state forest lands and county revenues. So with that, I have stolen this map from the the work of the Board of Forestry, because that they have it and it's available. But overall, there are 45,000 plus acres located within Washington County that are Washington County or state forest trust lands. And these are lands that are managed by the state on behalf of other governmental agencies. And therefore, as they manage those lands and gain revenues for them, they pay first themselves to manage the lands, and then they provide revenue out to the local taxing districts, because originally these were our lands that we turned over to the state because it was easier for the state to manage these cross-county large swaths of forest lands in a manner that would see the greatest impact and the greatest benefit instead of piecemealing it from Washington to Clatsop to Tillamook County, as the whole forest covers those counties, especially here in our district, forest district. So these lands, however, are not just managed for those revenue purposes, which come through timber harvest primarily. They also create recreation opportunities. So if you drive to the beach and you see the Tillamook State Forests and those campgrounds, that's the recreation. That's one of the types of recreation that's available in this area. But there are plenty of other areas where you can just take those logging roads and hang out in the state forest, provided it's safe and accessible and you're allowed to go down those roads. Please don't just hang out in timber areas. Harvest does happen. But in addition, there's a conservation component to how these lands are managed, particularly around water resources, because the riparian areas that run through these forest lands rely on the timber and the shading that it provides along the riparian corridors, as well as the fact that the roots hold in the dirt and prevent landslides from coming down into those riparian areas. So conserving those water resources is another project the Department of Forestry undertakes in partnership with other state departments that has benefit not just to the county and our clean water services tying into that, but also to the residents here who enjoy the recreation opportunities that come with fishing in those riparian areas, or just enhanced beauty, trails, bicycles, all of those things that we do in the forest where that water resource is part of the draw. So that is what Washington County trust lands are and how they're managed. But the key phrase that comes out of both the state statute and the conversations around how the state manages these lands is greatest permanent value. And there are a lot of ways in which this has been defined, and there's a lot of contention around what greatest permanent value means. And I am not going to bring up more than this statement, the litigation between the counties and the state related to this definition of greatest permanent value and how the forests are managed, because that is a very different conversation than I think was asked for this roundtable. And if you have questions related to that, I will of course turn it over to our attorney to tell you what needs to be said. But greatest permanent value has been defined for this county in a multitude of ways. State statute provides a definition around greatest permanent value of what that can include. It has 12 subsets of things that can be done to enhance the greatest permanent value of the forest. And those include enhanced recreation opportunities, enhanced environmental protections so that the forests are literally preserved and become permanent fixtures, and then also the revenue resource gathering of not just timber harvest, but all the other secondary materials that can come out of the forest, including mining activities and other such things. And then just the environmental quality that keeps us in compliance with a lot of other rules that are set at the state level or impact our ability to use our water sources properly. So all of that is located in statute. Next, the Oregon Department of Forestry, through the Board of Forestry, adopted state rules that further discuss what is done in order to protect the greatest permanent value. And those are again listed at that subsection of the OARs. I'm not going to read through it. It is included in the memo, kind of the highlights of what's in there. But again, it reflects not just revenue value, but other types of value that the forest provides in how we live, work, play, all of those things within Oregon's state forest parks. And then Washington County did pass an ordinance, resolution and ordinance 1327, which highlighted that Washington County supports a direction of forest management that supports timber harvest, water quality, recreational opportunities, and environmental preservation. Those core concepts are things that have been traced through the decisions that this board has made following that 2013 decision of a prior board to adopt that resolution in order to establish what our standards as Washington County are for how we work with our state partner as they manage the forest and what we support in the actions that they take as they manage our forest. Which is their responsibility under the state statute, is to properly manage the forest and to confer with counties as stakeholders and partners in the overall outcomes that we seek for these forest trust lands that impact our budgets, and not just our budgets, but other local taxing districts that lose revenues because these are publicly held lands, as opposed to previously when they were privately held lands, property taxes were paid on top of them, as well as harvest taxes that were paid on top of them that came back to local governments because they were within our jurisdictions before they got turned into trust lands. So if that wasn't confusing enough, I will turn now to the Habitat Conservation Plan. And what I want to talk about here and what I'm focusing on is what it is and why the state is doing it. And so first, we look to the program goals as established by the Department of Forestry. There are 6 goals here that tie the HCP back to the Endangered Species Act that is set at the federal level. So the Habitat Conservation Plan is a reflection of the fact that no government works alone, and that there is a overriding federal requirement that our decisions related to so many things have to be in compliance related to the Endangered Species Act. And if we are out of compliance, the federal government can step in and prevent us from taking the action that we want to pursue. In this case, timber harvest has the potential to create what is called a take. And a take is basically anything that harms the habitat, life, or potential reproduction of an endangered or threatened species that is established at the federal level. In order to not have every single timber harvest sale subject to litigation, or the overall forest management plan subject to litigation under the Endangered Species Act in the federal courts, the reason why the department is seeking this habitat conservation plan is to support what's called an incidental take permit. And an incidental take permit basically says, we know that a take is going to happen, so habitat might get harmed or a fish might die based on these actions. However, we think that's incidental to the plans that you have in place that enhance and do the best we can to conserve and prevent take as often and as much as possible. So the Habitat Conservation Plan is in support of that incidental take permit, or ITP. And therefore, the first goal is to meet the Endangered Species Act regulatory requirements. But it goes beyond that and is really looking to make sure that it's balancing those needs that are established under all the different definitions of the greatest permanent value, not just for revenue generation, but also what they call the social, economic, and environmental goals of the state forest management plan. And social includes the recreational opportunities and the use of the forest, but it also is about how these forests tie back to the cultural aspects of the history of Oregon, Native tribes, other invested users that aren't harvesters and they aren't just driving through. The economic reflects those revenue generations that support both the state's Board of Forestry and our county revenues. And then the environmental goals are, of course, the protection of habitat, species, water quality, all of those other things that can be impacted. So these were the program goals that were established when the process started in 2018, which was done in part to head off litigation that's happening in the federal courts related to the preservation of coho salmon in these same forest areas. So by seeking this incidental take permit, it puts the planning process back in the hands of the state. So in order to be comprehensive in that, the Habitat Conservation Plan covers over 600,000 acres located in Western Washington, Western Oregon, not just Western Washington County, which includes all 45,000 plus acres in Washington County that are managed as trust lands. In addition to the state trust lands, the Habitat Conservation Plan covers the common school lands as well, which are managed to a slightly different standard because the revenues generated from those lands go into the common school fund, which then goes out and assists the budget balancing for the states putting money back into the school systems. But so that's where you get the 619 plus thousand acres, as opposed to looking at the number of trust lands, which is slightly smaller than that. The Habitat Conservation Plan is intended to protect 17 endangered, threatened, or at-risk species. So it goes beyond those that are protected by the Endangered Species Act and into those species that have the potential to end up protected by the Endangered Species Act by creating swaths of habitat that reflect both terrestrial and aquatic species that use these lands as their habitat, reproductive site, or even, and basically call these Western Oregon forests home. The ITP and the Habitat Conservation Plan cover a 70-year period. This is in part a reflection of the fact that modeling gets really, it's a very technical term, after a certain amount of time that passes. And they felt that if they went beyond 70 years for the term of this permit, they'd be really missing some potential ecological issues. And finally, it commits the state to enact these adaptive management practices, which says we're going to check in and we're going to make sure that we're accomplishing the goals that we set out and meeting the Endangered Species Act's requirements, and then changing the Habitat Conservation Plan to reflect whether or not it is meeting the goals across the social, economic, and environmental standards that we have set up. So 70 years is a long period of time. Things change, catastrophes happen. It might need to change on the ground. And this Habitat Conservation Plan is intended to give them the flexibility to do that, reflecting on all of those different places. So how does it do this? Essentially, and this map is very fine and hard to read. So they do this in a number of ways. So all of those pink areas, and this is focused on Washington County, those pink areas are what are ODF managed lands. This is where much of the same practices that occur today related to harvest, building of roads, recreation would continue to occur with some modification and some adaptive management practices to ensure the best outcomes. But then these dark green lines, which look a lot like rivers because they are the proposed riparian conservation areas. And they're basically set at a distance from the riverbank to create the highest levels of protection of the habitat that's happening there and do the least amount of actual man management. So basically, this is the place where the ODF really intends to leave the forest to manage itself. And it's right next to the riparian corridors, so it does the most to enhance habitat and allow for the banks of the rivers to control themselves and to prevent washouts into the river, et cetera, et cetera. And then the light green area are the proposed habitat conservation areas, where there are enhanced levels of conservation practices, minimized management practices, where they're really looking to make sure that there's continuity in the habitat so that species, especially ones that migrate or move, or weirdly birds that fly, can connect from one area of their habitat to another without having to go through heavily managed areas or areas that are experiencing a timber harvest. So those habitat conservation areas are like that, the middle ground, but still focused on conservation, not management for purposes of timber revenue. And the pink lands are what ends up in the managed lands and doing that much more revenue based. That it's not quite a 50-50 split between those HCAs and RCAs versus the managed lands. There's a little bit more in conservation than there would be that sit in the managed land category overall across the state. And I don't recall the specific numbers for Washington County, but you can see the maps. There's a pretty good distribution for the county itself. So then we get to the draft EIS. And basically the draft EIS looked at how does the proposed habitat conservation plan impact expected social, economic, and environmental outcomes. You also received a long memo on this, and so here's my high-level summary. Basically, the two services at the federal level take the modeling data, the plan, and then they run their own modeling. And in the process of running their own modeling, they amended some expectations that came out of the Department of Forestry, and then said, what does this do? What does this HCP as written do in these areas? And they then asked the general public, what else should we be looking at? And there were a number of things that were brought to them, and they said either it's within or without the scope of what we do in an environmental impact statement. So they ended up assessing 5 different options. One is continuing current status quo, in which every timber sale is managed through a litigation, or having a generalized litigation that covers all of this area through the coho salmon litigation. They didn't even model that. They just said, what if we just continue using the current forest management plan? Second, they did an analysis of the if we just enacted the HCP as drafted. And then number 3 was an increase in the number of acres that get put into conservation. Number 4 was taking the permit term from 70 to 50 years. And the third was to increase the harvestable acreage. And they combined all of this and threw it into their modeling structure, and they came up with their results to figure out across a bunch of different areas how HCP or its alternatives would work out. And basically, they decided that across the options, there's not a lot of difference between the HCP and the 4 other things that were the 3 other things. So the increased conservation, increased harvest, or shortening the permit term, but that the HCP will meet the goals that were established. Specifically in Washington County, their modeling shows that there's probably a likelihood of increased levels of harvest and therefore increased levels of revenue to the county and to the state out of those lands. But obviously there would also be increased conservation and water quality improvements, and perhaps even increased recreational opportunities because of where those timber roads allow people to go that isn't a constructed campsite, for example, or a constructed interactive site within the forest lands. So for Washington County, the assessment of the draft EIS was that the outcomes are actually to our benefit to all of the things that this board has put forward as its preferred outcomes with forest management. However, it has to be made clear that this isn't as a straightforward of a comment period that is going to take place, because the Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee, that is an amalgamation of all of the Forest Trust Land counties broken up into a board that directly advises per statute the Board of Forestry in their decision making, feels that the modeling that was done is incorrect, and therefore what they expect and the modeling that they have received from their harvesters or their foresters, sorry, those are the words, their foresters show actually an across the board decline in harvesting and therefore revenues. And therefore there's this disagreement that is taking place at the FTLAC table as they approach the Board of Forestry with their concerns related to the Habitat Conservation Plan. Washington County can sit at that table, but we are not a voting member of the FTLAC. We instead are a participating county who is represented by our regional representative who comes out of Clatsop County. We're thrown in together with a bunch of counties so that the acreage for each seat is approximately the same across the regions. Another concern that has been raised from various parties is that adaptive management can change the conversation. So as they go through the landmarking and assessment of if the HCP is doing its job, there's no further conversation that's taking place as they modify how they're doing their management practices, and that can also have impacts on county revenue, or it can have impacts on species which weren't anticipated. And then finally, from other people's perspectives, there's concern that the HCP just does not sufficiently protect habitat or cover the threats that are necessary to protect the species that are listed in the HCP. Some people appreciate the ability to litigate a timber harvest, which would pretty much be taken off the table if it meets the HCP standards. So there's a lot of disagreement about how this draft EIS establishes the concerns of various parties across this conversation. So with all of that in your mind, when and how can this board participate if they so chose? So basically, I again stole some information from the Board of Forestry's information packets and pulled up their timeline. So they have been working on a forest management plan that is basically incorporating these standards established in the habitat conservation plan that they have also been drafting. And then that habitat conservation plan down in the blue line is sitting inside the NEPA process, which is why they did a draft EIS, and they are now in the process of finalizing that draft EIS, finalizing that EIS. So places where this board can participate are, and now it's an advantage perhaps that I have control of the mouse, is right here. There's going to be conversations that take place between FTLAC and the Board of Forestry related to finalizing the habitat conservation plan. In addition, there is going to be time to have conversations about the finalization of that EIS. However, I will also just throw this out there that within Washington County, we do not have technical expertise to kind of dive into the modeling, simply because we don't have a county forester, because we don't manage any county forests. So that makes it difficult to provide the technical feedback that would be expected by July as they go into the process of then finalizing the EIS. But where we can have a voice and make policy considerations is really in here as they develop what is that final HCP going to be, which of those options should they move forward with, or should they move forward with an HCP? And that is the crux of the conversation that is happening at the FTLAC table, where Washington County has a voice, but not a vote. But we also can speak directly to the Board of Forestry, which we have done in the past when this board has felt it was necessary to express our opinion as a county about how they've proceeded related to habitat conservation planning. So with that, the finalization is really kind of going to come down to the beginning of 2023. So in the next 6 months, there will be conversations that happen at the Board of Forestry and their every other month meetings, but also directly with the department through your GR team or through the commissioners speaking directly to state staff. So with that, I'm going to pull down the slideshow, turn it back over to you, Chair. Happy to answer questions, but now I believe it's time for this board to have its own conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Your presentation was really helpful. You may have to keep the slides available to share back up, but I also want to compliment you on the memo that you provided to us. It was helpful, it was clear, it was appropriately information packed to cover this topic. So, commissioners, what are your thoughts at this juncture? And I'll open it up, but also I'll ask our representative to CFTLAC, the council, Commissioner Willie, if he wants to kick us off or not.
Sure, I could do that. Aaron, I want to echo some of the comments the chair made. You did a great job on this memo. A lot of work in it. One correction in your presentation: our representative is from Columbia County, not from Clatsop County. It's Margaret Magruder, but your memo says that. So yeah, just a clarification there. This is obviously this is a very complex discussion. Council of Forest Trustlands has been going through this for the last couple of years. And I really do appreciate, Aaron, your coming up to speed. When I first became a commissioner, I went to Don Boone and said, how much forest revenues do we receive? And he didn't know, and nobody really paid any attention to it. So obviously it's a fairly small number. I think $800,000 was the actual number that came back. And just for understanding, I think in our budget, if I read our budget right, we're projected to have $1.6 million this year from timber sales. And that's probably not because of an increased harvest board feet, it's because of an increased value of timber, it would be my guess. But I didn't ask that question, so that's just my guess. I think the modeling, and again, Aaron, you and I have had this conversation. I think the modeling that you put in your memo is in pretty stark contrast to what the timber industry's modeling reflects. And just simplistically, their concern is that about 60% of the forest land is being restricted from harvest for the next 70 years. And they consider that to be excessive. I think they'd much prefer to have a 50-50 allocation there. And again, according to their numbers, it's a 25 to 30% reduction in harvest. Now, again, this is, I don't know, this is like accounting. You say, well, what's 2 plus 2? And you say, well, what do you want it to be? And so that's a little bit of how this modeling, I think, works. And so I don't know which one's more accurate, but I just think there's a pretty stark contrast. And I think the other thing, just to speak for the Forest Trust Lands Commission there, is that they were not included in the conversation with ODF. And that even though they specifically and regularly asked to be included in the conversation, they were not. And so I think there's a little bit of friction between those organizations right now and trying to work through that. So in your memo, you show that there is basically, and I think I'm going to flip to it, we have 5 alternatives, one of which is no action, which I believe is where the Council of Forest Trust Lands would prefer right now, that basically this would be parked and started over. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think probably legal counsel would say, if that was the recommendation, a federal judge would probably intervene and put this in place because we need to move ahead. So anyway, lots of things here that I'll be glad to have more conversation, and I'm really anxious to hear what the rest of the commission thinks about this. And again, it's a complex thing, so yeah, we'll have to work through that. I think too, and lastly, Aaron, you pointed to the fact that in April of 2013, the county board then put in an ordinance in action, and in it, it says that they also were specifically focused on the greatest permanent value, and they indicate in it that the benefits derived from the state forest land should include, but not limited to, sustainable and predictable production of forest products that generate revenues for the benefit of the state, counties, and Washington County and local taxing districts. So again, as you've said, everybody kind of has their own opinion of what greatest permanent value means, but I think we've kind of identified that, at least in that. And there was one more thing in there, but I've forgotten what it is. So I'll stop at this point in time and just ask for some direction. I mean, Roy was the only one around during those days, and so maybe he has a recollection of what that conversation looked like too. So if you could take, actually, from my standpoint, I just soon see everybody on the Hollywood Squares here, and see what during the conversation. Then if we need to go back to the slide projection, we can certainly do that. Thank you.
So just for note, Commissioner Willie did mention one aspect of that resolution and order. The board in the summertime, could be as late as September in 2019, did reaffirm our support for that resolution and order, as it included multiple aspects reflecting the state definition of greatest personal value. Other commissioners, thoughts, questions? Don't all jump at once.
I can tell you that I'm still a little overwhelmed by all this. I've read through everything. I've attended. I think Commissioner Willie and I attended a meeting out in Banks with members of the Board of Forestry about this issue. So I've been getting information in, but I'm really interested in hearing what others have to say. I feel like I'm just under the water here.
Commissioner Rogers, you've been involved with this topic for a while. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Jerry summed it up well. It's very complex, more complex than I think that we have time to do. And even with Erin speeding through it at her clip, she could have covered probably another hour and we still would be at the same place. That's why I looked to Jerry, and I looked to before him. I think it was I'm trying to remember, it was Andy, who it may have been Bob, who was dealing with this very complex issue. And how we came down back then was we were trying to find balance, and that's always what you try to do. And that's exactly what we thought we had done, is to find balance in the proposal, and that was what the original state proposal was. The only question I have, and I certainly would defer to our representative Jerry on that, because he's attending all the current stuff. But Erin, my question to you is that I always get a little bit concerned when we're attempting to enter into an area where we're restricting people from exercising constitutional rights to sue. And I understand why we like to do that. I mean, if we didn't, we would be forever in court fighting about everything. But I'm getting a little bit confused as to whether this action that's being proposed, while good for government and good for us to adjudicate things so that they don't have to be fought in court, it seems to be a bit of a muffle on some who would say, I think that I would rather exercise my constitutional rights to argue about values and what this language means. So in any way, and I though I've been around this, I've never been a direct participant in it. Are we in any way inhibiting rights of anyone by saying we support action that would come under some kind of an umbrella of you wouldn't sue on these things, that there would be some arbitration? Are we inhibiting anyone's rights, in your opinion?
My opinion is questionable all the time, but and I'll look to Tom to fix what I say wrong. But essentially, by the state pursuing an incidental take permit, it establishes that the actions that are in compliance with the Habitat Conservation Plan, which supported that permit, basically are within the Endangered Species Act. So it doesn't preclude someone from attempting to sue. What it precludes is, it basically establishes an affirmative defense, meaning that the state can say, we are following a federally approved habitat conservation plan, and this action fits within the take permit, and therefore this litigation we have an absolute defense to, and we are not in violation of the Endangered Species Act, and therefore, Your Honor, we request that you say thank you but no to the litigation and and throw it out. So I'm seeing head nods from Tom, so I didn't get that too wrong. So, but essentially it doesn't preclude someone from suing, saying either, like that the habitat conservation plan or the action taken was outside of the incidental take permit either. So if folks come in and say, you're in violation of the Endangered Species Act for other reasons, or for whatever reasons, there's an affirmative defense that the state can put forward, but if the litigant can show you're not actually acting within that incidental take permit or within the habitat conservation plan, that litigation would also move forward. So basically it's providing the state with an affirmative defense that they're staying within the bounds of federal law, and then requires the plaintiff to then show that they are outside of that permit process. So basically it's a stamp saying you can move forward with your work to the state. And would then therefore allow those timber sales and those harvest sales to move forward with less litigation challenging each sale under the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more to that, Roy, currently and for years, when these harvest sections go up for sale, it takes them a couple of years to work through the legal process. And I think for the good of the all, I think we're trying to find a happy spot. I don't say we. Certainly the state is trying to find a place where they can say, no, as long as you check the boxes and you meet the habitat conservation plan requirements and you've done all the homework and everything else that you need to do, then yes, we will authorize this. Theoretically, it's to significantly reduce the time that these trees go up for sale and actually are harvested. So yeah, that's it. I get that. Now the question is just everybody has to agree to the rules, and I think that's where we are right now. And anyway, I'll stop there. So I've got a couple of other things, but I'll stop and listen.
Why don't you go ahead with your couple of other things?
Well, it's that I think from my standpoint, when I go to those Council of Forest Trust Lands meetings, and I heard this at a COLPAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, one of the counties was saying under their modeling, they would lose $7 million a year in revenues from harvest. And I certainly didn't ask how they did that, and what their modeling looked like, and all of that. I'm trying to envision that this is small potatoes revenues for Washington County, but it's not for many counties. And not only does it impact their own budgets, but it impacts school districts, because they provide a significant amount of funding to their school districts, which that means the state doesn't have to provide that funding out of the state fund, school fund. So there's some ties to this that, from my standpoint, I'm just trying to listen and be sensitive to what the other counties certainly are going to be impacted. There's a lot of environmental good stuff that comes out of this. I mean, the carbon sequestration that our forests absorb is critical, and we absolutely need to make sure that we don't deny that by cutting down too many trees. We need to manage our forests very diligently. We heard about the spotted owl many years ago, a couple decades ago or something like that. The spotted owl is in this conversation again, and it's being threatened by the marbled murrelet, I believe. What's the one that's threatening him, Aaron?
The threat is the barred owl.
Marbled
murrelet is another protected species that would be covered by the habitat conservation plan.
Yeah. So this is a lot more information than I ever thought I'd get, and it's very, very educational, but I don't understand a lot of it. But anyway, this is really a big deal. So I'm really interested to see how we can weigh in on this. So there, now I'm done. Thank you.
Commissioner Fye, you looked pretty busy earlier. Is there anything you'd like to ask about or share? I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now we can.
It's not the computer that's muted. It must be the headphones. Aaron, thank you for that presentation. I'm in the same category with Commissioner Treese, and this is a lot more information. But I'm interested in this subject, and so I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll weigh in now out of the five of us. So this is a topic that I have been following through attending various Council of Forest Trust Land meetings, Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee meetings, and various Board of Forestry meetings, as well as additional research and reading information. As Commissioner Willie is right, this is a big deal for many of the other counties of the Council of Forest Trust Lands because of the degree of revenue that their budgets have been relying upon from timber harvest. And I have a high level of appreciation for that and recognize how changes to the timber levels and the revenue do affect them. And it's much easier to just count on the way things have been. But we do know that the status quo doesn't work because of the level of litigation, the fact that it has not allowed for any degree of certainty for the timber industry. And as such, that's where I really appreciate the task that the state has taken on in developing new plans and aligning their plans, the forest management plan, the habitat conservation plan, and all that has gone into the scenarios that have been performed and analyzed as part of this environmental impact statement. So we are certainly decision makers for Washington County as the Board of County Commissioners, but we're not decision makers for CFTLAC, which is advisory to the Board of Forestry, and we're not the Board of Forestry who will be making these decisions. I also want to share that forestry and timber harvesting is an important industry in many Oregon counties. And that includes ours of Washington County as well. We know that every revenue contribution is meaningful to our budget and particularly to our general fund. I appreciate how Aaron has shared the slide with the timeline, and we all have that available to us in the packet, so we don't need to show it again, but I will make reference to it. The Board of Forestry does have a decision point coming up on September 7th with regard to their direction on the habitat conservation plan. And that decision making is based upon the scenario planning that has gone into the draft environmental impact statement that has been out and available for public comment. So irrespective of what we decide as a Board of Commissioners for weighing in on that and using our own voice, should we choose to or not, for September 7th. I know that at a minimum, I will be as a member of this board, one of 5. And I don't think this is a surprise to any of you, particularly as I have really been invested in the work that the state has been doing in this area, as well as the kind of outcomes that other stakeholders, including the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, has been promoting. I support the state approach for the forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan, meaning I support the approach that they have taken in trying to balance different needs, but towards the goals that they have stated around that more predictability and certainty, and supporting the various uses that are embodied by the greatest permanent value. I also support the state strategy that has been enabled by the Habitat Conservation Plan. And it's particularly notable because of what we as a community have learned about climate change and the pressure that is on species. I remember years ago, 8 years ago, while I was a Metro councilor, and during those summer months, we as a greater community were getting information from the Audubon Society at the national level, as well as here in the state, about the pressure that birds were under because of climate change. The birds which migrate are reliant upon the budding of certain plants to sustain the insects, which the birds rely upon at different times of the year. So this habitat conservation plan has been constructed, as Ms. Doyle has shared with us today, based upon the needs of different species. And we know through climate change that there will continue to be additional pressures. There are also needs and pressures on water, and there is tremendous value with timber sequestration, as well as the use of timber. We have timber laminated, lumber, I can't remember the acronym now, that we didn't have years ago. So now, because of that laminated timber, instead of using steel and more concrete, which is far more intensive with greenhouse gases, we can now use these new timber structures, which is very exciting. These scenarios that are defined and pursued in terms of the draft EIS are really key. I trust the Board of Forestry to continue to balance the needs and the various aspects of greatest permanent value. So I know I will be weighing in towards that end in advance of that September 7th date. I recommend that we as a board weigh in as such as well as a board through that September meeting as well. But those are my comments today here in early June. So I want to thank everyone for bringing this topic forward. It's been a challenge for us to try and get this topic scheduled in to our work, but I think it's also been very timely relative to all that is known now going through the process. So good job, Ms. Doyle. Yes, Commissioner Treese.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. What I'm not certain about is, Aaron, you talked about, Ms. Doyle, you talked about the period of time this summer for the board to be engaged. Is there, I'm not certain what our responsibility or our, it's not necessarily responsibility, what is our predilection, if you will, for participating in that. And Chair, that wasn't answered for me either there in your comments. So can you, Ms. Doyle, can you let me know what your thoughts are? And I understand that we don't have, we're not the quote player, but what is our role there?
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. There are the ways that we have participated in the past is through letters and testimony provided to the Board of Forestry at their meetings, essentially stating the position of the county that has in the letters that we have drafted in 2021, I think 2020 and 2021 has been encouraging them to continue to move forward through the habitat conservation planning process and submitting it in to the federal process. From here, the opportunities will be at the Board of Forestry meetings again to provide written comments in saying what the position of the county is or the position of an individual commissioner if the county decides not to act. But essentially, and the other piece of it is the conversation that would be held at the FTLAC or CFTLC. There are too many acronyms, which are essentially the same body. It's a matter of who calls the meeting. That Commissioner Willie has participated in those conversations. So it could also take place voicing the county's position relative to the HCP at that table as a means of advancing the conversation amongst other counties. But so those are the two real places where this board can act as one to provide direct testimony to the Board of Forestry at one of their future meetings before they finalize their decision to submit a final HCP and seek a final environmental impact statement, and to participate at the county tables that provide those advisory conversations, CFTLC, which is called for by AOC when they choose to, but definitely will happen at the annual conference, but that would be later in the year and late in this process, or at FTLAC, which is called by the Board of Forestry because they administer that organization. And they allow non-voting members to speak at those meetings, but they do not allow non-voting members to vote. So those would be the two avenues, or there's the option that is available to the board to continue to learn and not move forward. But that is the choice of the board to make.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Pam, that clarification. That's going to be an important thing for the next, well, until we get to the September 7th deadline. Here's what I'm have kind of committed myself to do is I need to get more clarification on the impact, not only on our habitat, but on our counties, and the certainly the modeling. And I just need to get more information so that I understand what it is that I'm basically agreeing to. So I'm not ready to sign on to the letter that the chair has proposed yet, because I want to do some more homework on that. So I just wanted to communicate that's where I am right now, having listened to a lot of this dialogue and wanting to do some more research on it. So maybe I'll communicate that at a later meeting.
Does anyone have anything else for today? All righty. Well, thank you again, Ms. Doyle. Appreciate it. So The last topic on our agenda is any additional items for board follow-up or carryover from work session. Ms. Angie, was there anything? Okay. Phew, we're just under the wire at 1 o'clock. Is there anything else commissioners have or need for today? No? Okay. So I think that's it. We can adjourn today's roundtable of June 2nd, 2022. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.